Yo, what's going on, everybody? Joe Rostic here. What do you believe? Let me know if you want to come on up and debate. I'm going to get right into reviewing various scholars who agree with me that illusionary understandings of the self, illusionism, as promoted by Rosenburg, Harris, and Dennett, is straight bat nutty, and they're not even Christians or monotheistic religions. Some of them are panpsychics, believe in a panpsychism. Others are Platonists. Some just are agnostic, because I'm tired of looking at the comments and people responding to my argument as if I'm the dumb dumb. I am not the dumb dumb, friends. Those of you who think consciousness is just reducible to the mental states of physical actions in the brain have no idea what's going on. Causation or correlation does not mean causation. And those mental states that you're seeing with brain waves have nothing to do with how we understand consciousness and qualia in the sense of how it's processed and how the seer or the observer receives that information. In other words, the brain can have various mental states in different parts of the brain because of damage and still have qualia. It shouldn't be there, but it will be there. And then while having that qualia, those states, it will then make a unified state of all the data, including its physical surroundings and its mental perception. And all of this, you're trying to say, is not a self while acting as a self and calling it mere consciousness, which becomes equivocation of what consciousness and self is. The consciousness is an attribute of the self, to be aware. And sometimes the self is not aware when it gets knocked out or sleeping, etc., but it is still possessing the conscious state. The self will then ground that conscious state throughout times with its memories. Yes, of course, it can be in the brain. Like we can see, the brain is utilized by the self and relates to it. So if if you suffer brain damage, you can have loss of memory and so forth. But it doesn't mean that these are identical, or that one is emerging from the other, like one physical state making another physical state called a memory, and now a memory is somehow a part of a physical state. This just means that your self uses physical states, uses the chemicals and whatever's going on inside of the neurology of the brain to help interact with the world, to interact with memory, to interact with these things. As we've always said, and this is not just me or a Christian, this is a expert in the field, said that ourselves are like the pianist, and then the brain and the hardware is like the piano. So it's interacting with it, but it's not the cause of it. So let's just jump right into Alex Rosenberg's interview here with a panpsychic, and let's get into
What do you think this microphone in front of me is made out of?
I think it's made out of mental states, mind states. And the matter that we attribute to it is an extrinsic appearance and an image of mental states.
Okay, quite a concise answer to what can be in this context quite a complicated question, and perhaps one that's already raised a few eyebrows. I think that if you ask the average person on the street, what is a microphone made out of, they might tell you it's made out of metal. You ask them what metal's made out of, and you sort of keep going down until you get to it's made out of atoms, and you ask what's an atom made out of, well, it's made out of electrons, and what's an electron made out of, and they kind of begin to struggle a little bit. And this is an idea that I've been interested in recently, and there's this growing popularity in the suggestion that once we get down to the foundation of reality, we're talking about something like consciousness or mind. I've been talking about that in the context of panpsychism. You have a few choice words for panpsychism, which hopefully we can get into and we can critique it. But I think they kind of come from the same kind of starting point, which is that this assumption of materialism.
Also, idealism is another way to look at things.
That everything is kind of made up of stuff, like, inert atoms that bump into each other, is somehow mistaken. Bearing in mind that probably the majority of people who are listening are materialists, I would assume. How do you begin getting into a discussion about what the world is really made of and trying to argue that materialism is false?
Well, we need to get out some of the false implications that people usually derive if I say that the microphone is made of mental states. I'm not denying metal. I'm not denying what appears to perception and measurement as matter, as atoms. These things are empirically verified. We can measure this stuff. There is something out there that goes by the name of atom and metal and aluminium and so forth. None of that is denied. I'm not denying that there is an external world beyond my mind. What I'm saying is that these external world beyond my mind, just like my mind, is also made of mental states. And just as my mental states appear to you as...
So I just don't have time to play all of these. I'm just going to go through a bunch of them. Okay. So now that maybe some of you are seeing what's going on today, here's how I use chat. Everybody's going to have their own ideas of how to use chat. I don't care what you think about it. I just show you how I use it and how it saves me time. So one of the things that I wanted was to make a table of agnostics and atheists who reject Harris and Dennett, Rosenburg, the self is an illusion. And then you can get a quick understanding of some of the people that we're looking up today. Okay. Thomas Nagel, Galen Strawson, John Searle, David Chambers, Ned Block. Here you see I have David Chambers, Galen Strawson, Raymond Tillis, Ned Block, Colin McGinn. Here you go. And then what we're listening to right now is Bernardo. He's an idealist, Bernardo Castro. And so I'm just going to say add him to the list just so you can see a complete list here. You can take a screenshot of this. Okay. Okay. Let me see here. Let me get here to the end. Chat. If you want to let me know where you're watching from or to say hi, what's up, Lucas Cap? Just going a little deep here. Okay. Castro rejects the denial of the self. Instead, he argues the ego is constructed by the experiencing self as real, irreducible, and the very ground of existence. Add him to the list, just so you can see how I'm doing it. Okay. Now, sometimes people say, well, you're just going to chat. Look behind me, dude. Look behind me. You see what I have here? These are not comic books. I have about 600-700 books right here. I've got about 600-700 books on my Kindle. And then I believe I have about that many, if not 1,000, in my theological work. Okay. Well, let me just show you here some that I pulled out that I believe are related. Give me just a moment. Okay. So here are just some of my hard book here. Okay. Leonardo Susskind, and I'm just bad with spelling and names, by the way. Black Holes, Information and the String Theory Revolution, Holographic Universe. And this just kind of builds on this idea that information is at the core. Okay. Aping Mankind. That's when you hear me talking about your aping mind. That's Raymond Tallis. Okay. Highlights here in the book. Let me just give you one of my highlights. This is why I prefer Kindle as opposed to hardback right here. You might wonder whether it really matters that an image of humanity based on the twin pillars of Darwinism and brain science is taking such a hold within academia. Okay. And then it says the distinctive features of human beings, selfhood, free will, and collective space called the human world, the sense that would lead our lives rather than simply live them as organisms do, are being discarded as illusions by many, even by philosophers. This is page 8 of his book, Aping Mankind. And he's basically making the argument that that we need a more robust understanding of the actual self than just thinking Darwinism and brain science settles it. Okay. There you go. That was just the first one that I picked. Here's another one. The link between the Darwinization of our understanding of humanity, which I have characterized as an inflamed mode of Darwin's thought or Darwinitis, and neuromania, the appeal to the brain as revealed through the latest science to explain behavior, is, oh man, I'm losing my ability to read right here. Give me just a moment. I apologize. Let me get my light right here. I'm just picking out quotes just so you can see I have the books and what I've looked at. Here we go. Is obvious. If the brain is an evolved organ, as it most certainly is, because remember, these guys are not Christians, whatever, right? Its purpose must be the same as all the other organs, namely to contribute to the curing of the survival of the organism, whose function is in turn to ensure the replication of genetic material for which it is a vehicle. If we are our brains, then ultimately all we do, think, and feel must be subordinated to this imperative, whether we know it or not. And so he begins to see the contradiction there. And then my own quarrel with neuromania goes back to my time as a medical student in the 1960s, when I argued with my infinitely patient tutor in neuropsychology about the difference between brain activity and our consciousness. It's number 5. Okay. So here he's calling it the aping of the mind, that if your brain is just reducible to brain activity, you're denying the consciousness, and then you're folding in on yourself into a world of contradiction. He's calling that idea that you can do that as neuromania, Darwinization, Darwinitis. Okay. That's aping of the mind. That's Tillis. Paul Davies, God in the New Physics, God in the New Physics, the Mind of God, Paul Davies as well. Others that I don't think I have Paul Tillis, Raymond Tillis. Yeah, I do have one by Raymond Tillis, but I'm giving you a bunch of this just to show you. And we're listening to Bastrop right now, who is an idealist, just to show you. I don't know why. I just felt like doing this because I don't have anything to prove. Maybe the comment section got to me a little bit. The fact that you think that we as Christians are grasping at straws to try to smuggle our God into the hard consciousness problem, the fact that you think we're doing this shows how out of touch you are with the vast majority of people in these fields that are now starting to turn. And let me just take away vast majority, because I don't want to be held to a statistic on this, okay? But from many, many, many people in this field that 100% do not believe the hard problem is solved, don't believe you get there by simply denying the self, okay? So here are some, just to name a few: Thomas Nagel, Galen Strawson, John Searle, David Chambers, Ned Block, Raymond Tillis, who we just mentioned, Colin McGuinn, Philip Goff, Sam Colin, Herbert Dreises, Sean Gallagher, Bernardo Castro, okay? And then let me just see, what about Paul Davies? Just questioning about him. And then what else did I hear about the information? Yes, he absolutely rejects the ideas of self as an illusion. Okay, so we could add him to the list. And what about proponents of the what about those who propose a holographic universe like Leonard Susskind? Because I don't know exactly where he falls on this, but I know that he is looking at that, actually proposes. Whether he supports the idea, he doesn't. Okay, good. Just making sure, because I didn't want to put him out there and not have all of his information, because I get these books for different reasons. The reason why I was very much interested in this book, and it's kind of hard to see, but I think you can see on my chat as well. One of the reasons why I like that book is because whether you're a panpsychic, whether you're an idealist, whether you're just an honest agnostic about the problem, or someone who believes that information is grounding everything, like in AI or game theory or holographic theory, these different things kind of meld in together, like what we're learning from our games, what we're learning from building AI, what we're learning from information. You put all those together, you get this clear understanding that the idea of the self being illusion is not at all being accepted by top thinkers. It's being rejected by many, and many are coming to conclusions just like what we would have. And of course, if I would argue a Platonist, an idealist, or a panpsychic as a Christian, I would have a different kind of argument than I would with a strictly materialistic person, right? But for whatever reason, the strict materialists keep coming under my comments, and they keep saying nonsense as if we as Christians are the only one who see these problems. And so I just wanted to show you that. And let me just go back here. I see somebody's here, Mikey. I see one of your tags up is Jesus. There's Jesus is God. Do you believe in God? Just not Jesus is God. I'm sorry, man. I do so bad at reading these. I see one of your tags up there. Jesus is God. Yes, I'm debating people who don't believe Jesus is God. Do you believe in God? Just not Jesus is God. I believe Jesus is God. I believe in the Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, 3 persons sharing one divine essence are God. So sorry if I didn't understand that. If you want to clarify, You're one of my only viewers, so I'll take some time. But I just want to go back to this and give Bernardo just a few moments to share what he has to say. And then I will continue on to the other. We're just going to go through them quickly. I'm just putting their names up here. I'm putting their books up here. I'm putting that chat chart up here. So let me just go back here so everybody can see it. Let me just see. Now add all these to the table. Okay, so you can see it, because we all know how to use the internet, right? When I put this table up here, you now can go slow and research this. You can pause the screen. You can look at their books. You can look at the videos I'm putting up here, right? Here you go. Boom. Just wanted to show you that this popular idea that Sam Harris and Daniel Dennett and Alex Rosenburg are really, not just by me, by the people we're listening to, being dum-dums and donkey brains. That doesn't mean I don't love them. Doesn't mean I don't pray for them. Okay, no problem, Mike. It just means that you're not as smart as you think when you're rejecting what we would all know as the self. Going to a self as an illusion is not as smart as you think it is. Okay, just a little bit more of Bernardo here.
Matter, my brain, the atoms of my body, the very measurable, very physical stuff. So the mental states that constitute the external world appear to me as matter, part of which is this microphone made of mental states in front of you. So we have to avoid this culture-induced wrong implications and false dichotomy, and start by saying what we are not denying, so people don't run away with an assumption that is false, and then explain what we do mean.
Huh? Look, catch this.
Gotta be good, these commercials.
So the real world, so to speak, is out there. Some people think that if you think that everything's made up of mind, that kind of the microphone is like just an idea in my head, or that I somehow created it by my imagination, a bit like a dream that I'm having right now. But that's not what you're getting at, right?
That's not what I'm saying. What you are describing is either solipsism or a version of subjective idealism, a la Berkeley, who said to be is to be perceived. So things exist only insofar as they are perceived. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that, yes, there is a world out there independent of my mind, a world that does what it does and would still do it even if I were not here to perceive it, even if there were nobody here to perceive it. But that world too, is just like me, is made of mental states. And when there is a perceiver, those mental states appear to the perceiver according to the qualities that we describe as physicality, like extension, texture, temperature, weight, and so forth.
Okay, everybody get that? I mean, is that pretty obvious that what he's saying right here? Mental states make up the world. He's an idealist, okay? Let me just put here, just so we can all see. Break down in one sentence: dualist, idealist, panpsychics, Platonist, and illusionist / materialist. Okay, just so we can all see it right here. The Oompa Loompas, in my opinion, are these guys right at the end. Dualists, mind, body, are two fundamentally different kinds of reality. Idealists believe mind or consciousness is the fundamental reality and matter depends on this. Panpsychists believe consciousness is a base feature of all physical things, even the smallest particles. Platonists believe abstract realities like numbers, forms, or universals exist independently of the physical world and minds. Illusionist materialists believe consciousness or the self is not fundamental, but is instead a brain-generated appearance or illusion produced by physical processes. Okay, so just to make sure that you guys are tracking with me, all top four share in common a rejection of illusionism. Correct? And this is unbiased, right? I'm not asking it to say anything but yep. So just want to make sure we're all on the same page. And that's why I have so much more of an appreciation for agnostics and atheists who actually just fall into these top categories. Like, this is totally okay. Like, we can go on from here and actually have conversations instead of contradicting ourselves left and right. And that's why I developed here the self dilemma. Okay. And I'll just share it with you real quick so you can see it here as well. Can you solve the self dilemma? Okay. What button do you pick? The self, the person, the I inside the body is an illusion along with all the others. That's what Alex Rosenburg says, Daniel Dennett, and Sam Harris, okay? I am a self that came to the conclusion to be an atheist. Now, you notice here, there's already a problem. Because if you deny the self, as these kind of people do, you have no way to make decisions for yourself. You're just a deterministic mechanism like a wound up clock that's ticking right now, or a ball rolling down the hill with the forces of gravity, etc. But most people are going to say you came to that decision that maybe at one time you were a Christian and then now you're no longer a Christian, and one time you were a dualist, or one time you were this and now you were that. So now we're put into a conundrum, because now if you're going to take credit for your studies and the books and all the clever little arguments you keep coming up with, now you're going to have to admit that you are a self that makes self-determined decisions, that you use some kind of a free will based on rational thinking. But then if you deny yourself and say, well, no, I am just a ball in motion, I'm just pop fizzing, I don't have any real say in all of this, then there's nothing more to discuss with you, because I can't change your mind. You can't change my mind. There's no experience that you're going to have that's going to produce any type of real quali, any type of real change. You're just simply chemicals and motions, mental states that you have no control over. And that's the whole sum of you. So then we shouldn't debate anymore, right? So if we're going to debate, you have to deny the denial of self. You have to accept a self. And so now the debate is over. If you say that you will deny yourself and you're going to stay true to it, the debate is over, because we have nothing to debate about. I'm just chemicals in motion, molecules in motion. So are you, right? And that's why now I break it down. If you choose the self as an illusion, you contradict any position you hold because of reasoning. You cannot hold anything because of reasoning. You didn't reason it. Just like we heard here in Tillis's book, Aping of the Mind, you are now, you are now in neuromania. You have no ability to differentiate any thoughts you're having one from another as being rational or irrational, because there is no such thing as rational or irrational in Darwinism. And no matter how much you try to insert in their emergence and so forth, emergence doesn't make rational or irrational. So you cannot be a rational thinker. Every thought you have is just a chemical reaction forced on you by your DNA. You are a puppet with no ability to reason. So dance, monkey, dance, okay? If you believe you are a self, like I just described before, then atheism is false, because the self cannot be explained in atheism. You have to go to something other than that. Now, do I believe that sometimes atheists can be some of these things we talked about, maybe an idealist, panpsychic, or whatever? Sure, they can be, but they are not consistent. And so then I would show them that they're not consistent with their atheism. Atheism rejects metaphysics. And so if you're an atheist that begins to accept metaphysics, you're a different kind of an atheist. You're redefining it. You're equivocating on that word. So it cannot explain a self that is not physically found in the brain. Therefore, the very idea of a self must be borrowed from a non-atheistic worldview. Okay? Now, therefore, either way, atheism is false. If you say that the self is an illusion and that the self doesn't exist, statements like "I believe in atheism" or "atheism is true" have no meaning, because there is no self to believe or evaluate anything, you and me included. If you then concede and say you are a self and the self does exist, atheism is false, because atheism cannot explain or ground a self that is not identical to the brain or reducible to its functions. So remember, you are only left with the material world. And if you start appealing to idealism and various things like that, you're leaving the world of atheism. Therefore, if the self doesn't exist, no one can believe atheism. If the self does exist, atheism is false, because it cannot account for the self you're borrowing. Here it is in a syllogism. Premise 1, either the self exists or it does not exist. Premise 2, if the self does not exist, atheism cannot be believed. If the self exists, atheism cannot explain it or ground it. Therefore, atheism cannot be true either way. Here's another way of thinking about it. When you start hearing the way they say about the self and denial of it, here's how just brute fact they make it out to be. If you still can't sleep, this is Rosenburg after he denies the self, and he's talking to you like yourself from a point of view as a self. If you still can't sleep at night, even after accepting science's answers to the persistent questions, you probably just need one more little thing, take a Prozac and keep taking them till they kick in. You see how crazy that is? Here we go from Darwin out of Eden. The universe we observe precisely has the properties we should expect. If there is at bottom no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. DNA neither knows nor cares. DNA just is, and we dance to its music. So there you go. Dance, monkey, dance. And I believe that was the end of it. Yep. So there you go. Let's go now to our next one. David Chambers and how consciousness defeats materialism.
Many of my friends are Dave, if I would have a psychological wish, it would be that materialism isn't true. I was trained as a brain scientist. Many of my friends are scientists, so I have a feeling that it probably is. Consciousness enters the scene and changes the dynamics. How are the different ways that we can understand consciousness?
Well, I was trained as a scientist my attitude was that materialism had to be true. And there was just this little problem reconciling materialism with consciousness. And only over time have I begun to think this is more and more of a problem. In fact, maybe it's impossible to reconcile consciousness with materialism. But the basic views that one might take on this thing include materialism, the thesis that everything is ultimately physical, including consciousness. Dualism, the thesis there's two fundamentally different kinds of things, matter and consciousness. And to make the group complete, idealism, the view that all there is in the world is consciousness, and matter is just derivative of that.
Okay, so let's take each of these categories and maybe dissect them down to where philosophers have thought deeply about it. Because most people think that it's either consciousness or God. I mean, that's the story. But there are some subtle differences here. Let's start with materialism. You've articulated three.
Yes, and that's what I believe, and I believe I can prove that, because anybody who starts going over to the self being real, or consciousness existing as a self, and that the self grounds the conscious states, right? Like it observes it and interacts with it. The moment we go there, whether you call it any of those other things, idealism, panpsychism, or Platonism, you've left the world of atheism. Now you're going to the world of God, the ultimate mind, the ultimate grounding, the ultimate observer.
Subdivisions that you can think about materialism in. What are they?
Well, the basic problem for materialism about consciousness is something like this. You could know all about the physical processes in the world, in the brain, and not know about consciousness. Somebody could know about every last neuron in the brain involved in, say, color processing. They wouldn't know about the experience. That wouldn't tell them about the experience of seeing red. So what's a materialist to do about that? Prima facie, something's been left out of the material story. So three different attitudes I can take. First attitude, the one I call the type A attitude, is just to take a hard line, deny consciousness. There's just nothing here that needs explaining. There's not really a phenomenon of consciousness at all. You explain everything there is to say about the brain, end of story.
And you call that eliminativism because you eliminate it.
Yeah, basically you say there's nothing else here to explain about what there is in the brain. Who cares about consciousness?
And there was a long tradition in that. So behaviorism, in one sense, ignored consciousness, and many well-known philosophers would take that view that we think we are conscious, but we're really not. It's an illusion.
Okay, and by the way, people have tried to say, oh, we don't deny consciousness, we just deny the self. No one's ever denied consciousness. That's untrue. People have tried to deny that as well, because if you start saying that the self is an illusion, why isn't consciousness an illusion? When you say you can't show the self in science, and that there's no like hard evidence for this, there's no hard evidence for consciousness. Once again, all you have is brain states, mental states showed up on, EKGs or whatever going on in brain scans, MRIs, and so forth, and these different devices that they MKGs, whatever. Let me just get that, because I know there's different kind of ways to chart brain states. How do you detect brain states? EKG, MRI, and then there's this other one, right? Okay, brain states, yeah, EEG, EKG, MRI. There you go, EEG, EKG, MRI, fMRI is what I was thinking about. Yep, functional MRI. Yep, there you go. So all of this does not equate to consciousness. You don't show that in science. So just like somebody says you can't show the self in science, you can't show consciousness. Can any of these show the hard or soft problem of consciousness has been solved? Can any of these show that the hard or soft problem of consciousness? No. Of course not. So there you go. So that's why people can say consciousness is an illusion as well. Maybe they don't say it as much now. Now they just say self is an illusion.
Some people, behaviorists ignore consciousness, saying, well, yeah, that's not my problem. But the harder line is to deny consciousness and say, in fact, there's no such thing. It's an illusion. I find that view impossible to believe myself, because I take consciousness to be a fundamental datum of our existence.
Okay, so that's type A.
Yeah.
So that's the first one. Second one.
Type B materialism, I guess, is the one that says, okay, there is this phenomenon of consciousness, and there is a gap between our knowledge of the brain and our knowledge of consciousness, maybe even a fundamental gap. But that's only really a conceptual gap. It's a gap in knowledge of a level of thought. So knowledge of the brain will never produce knowledge of consciousness. But they say, in nature, consciousness and the brain are one and the same.
Here's a hot take. If you have a
My goodness, I'm going to hit all these commercials today. And I think that's some of the people of what I've been debating online. That's what they
audience, the best way to
thing. So there's no gap at the level of existence. There's just two ways that we come to know about this thing. From the outside, you look at a brain and you see a brain. From the inside, you think about a brain and it seems to you like consciousness. But it's just one thing in nature. That's a very attractive view in many ways. Unfortunately, I think it can't work, but very attractive view.
So there's a gap in knowledge, but in principle, there's no gap in substance or being or ontology, we call it. So there's no real difference, but there is this knowledge difference.
On this view, there's two basic kinds of concepts. There's physical concepts when we look at physical processes from the outside, and there's mental concepts when we look at these processes from the inside. These are two different ways of thinking. But on this view, there are two different ways of thinking about one underlying reality. Physical processes and consciousness are one and the same thing.
Okay. So it's materialistic because consciousness is not a real independent thing, even though they seem to be.
Exactly. One phenomenon in the world, two ways, two means of access to it.
Okay. Third approach to materialism.
So another view is that there is a gap between physical processes and consciousness in our current theories that right now, thinking about the physical processes won't tell us about consciousness, but that's a gap that could be closed in the limit. Is that right now, we're not smart enough to figure out the connection between brain processes and consciousness. But if we do enough more science and enough more philosophy, perhaps in the ideal limit, we'll be able to deduce the whole story about consciousness from the physical story. So maybe once Laplace's demon knows all about the brain and all about the interactions of the neurons, he'll then be able to figure out everything there is to know about the experience of consciousness. It's just that we're not there yet.
And that would be a view of most neuroscientists, I would think. That given enough time and the progress that we've had, we eventually can have go from the neural correlates of consciousness to the neural causes of consciousness. Fundamental difference now, but we can progress towards it.
I think this is probably the view of the average agnostic in the street about this question. We haven't figured out consciousness yet. Neuroscience can't do it yet, but somewhere down the line, we're going to get there. Now, my own view is there's a principled gap here. Neuroscience is just going to give us.
Okay, there we go. And when you think about this, Christians are not saying we know all the mechanisms in the physical world of how the self operates. What we're just saying is that gap is irreducible to physical processes, and you're never going to get there. And he agrees that they're not going to get there through physical processes.
More neuroscience gives us structure of the brain and dynamics of what we do. And that's all it's ever going to give us. More and more structure, more and more dynamics, more and more behavior. And that's always going to leave, in principle, a gap to consciousness. But this other view, the agnostic view, basically says that, well, somewhere along the line, we're going to figure out how to cross that gap.
An argument can be made that the approach you're taking is a linear one, and maybe there's some nonlinear dynamics. Best example is an atomic bomb. You have 1.9 kilograms of U-235 or whatever the number is, and it's radioactive, and you shouldn't touch it or get near it, but it's inert. And you add another ounce or whatever, and you have an atomic bomb. So you have a critical mass at some point. There's no difference. There's no consciousness there, no non-physical stuff, but you have a vastly different experience.
It's very tempting and seductive, I think, to think that the key to consciousness is going to lie in something like chaos theory, nonlinear dynamics. Who would ever guess that the motion of a hurricane would emerge from simple principles of airflow? But what you find in all those other cases, like the hurricane and the water wave and so on, is complicated dynamics emerging from simple dynamics, complicated structures emerging from simple structures, new and surprising structures. With consciousness, we find something fundamentally new, not just more complex structures, not just more complex dynamics and functions, but a whole new kind of thing, subjective.
A whole new kind of thing. It's not something you can get to by keep adding more complexity to the underlying brain, or what we would consider to like be these chemicals producing mental states, whatever. You can't just keep adding more of that complexity to that to now get something like consciousness, because as he is going to state here, and I agree, that it's absolutely a unique thing in of itself. It's like you're trying to build a plastic say like a plastic statue, and you feel like the more you melt this plastic and mold it and all of this, somehow that's going to make it marble. Like no way in any world does the plastic, no matter how complex you design that statue to be, will ever be like the marble, a entirely different substance.
Experience. And I think it's the kind of thing which in principle, just explaining structures and functions won't explain. So that's why I think there's a difference in principle here.
Subjective experience is a different kind of new thing than an atomic bomb is a different kind of new thing?
Different kind, more radically new thing, more radically different in kind. You can explain all the behavior, all the structure, all the function you like in the vicinity of consciousness, the things I do, the things I say, the amazing dynamics of the human brain. And it will still leave this further open question. Why is all that accompanied by first-person subjective experience of the mind and the world?
Okay, you got me fascinated because you now have three kinds of materialism and you've rejected all three. So I want to see what's left. You got a couple kinds of dualism, and go for it.
So once you reject materialism, I think what you basically have to do is admit consciousness as a fundamental category of the world, perhaps alongside physical categories like space and time and mass. Then the basic question is, where on earth does consciousness fit in? We had this beautiful closed.
There we go. I don't have time to listen to all of his explanations there. I'm just going to run through another one. He considers it fundamental. Let's now go to Galen Strawson. Let's go here.
Galen, in trying to understand what I'm all about, I feel a certain sense of unity, and I know it's brain systems and all of that. But you've talked about selves, that understanding what our selves are critical to understand what we are as human beings. How do we begin to define selves? What are the issues? And why is what something that seems obvious to everyone is really a deep philosophical issue?
Well, I think one of the most striking differences among people is that some people, when they look back to the past or to the future, think that's me back there 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, and sort of somewhat more vaguely, but the same into the future. I'm the guy who's going to need a pension or something. Whereas other people live in a completely different way. They look back 6 months and they think I don't really find myself there, and they really don't think that much about the future. Now, we're all human beings, and we're all born and grow up and eventually die. So we're all the same. We're all the same in that respect. But you have this different experience of being in time. Some people are, as it were, long-term people, and some people are short-term. And that's where I find it useful to use the word selves as opposed to the word just human being or person, because once again, we're all as human beings or persons, we all just have a life. But somehow, as selves, it seems that we can vary. So. But of course, we often use the word person when we think about that aspect. We say, I'm not the same person that I was. So maybe the word person is not helpful. But that's one thing that I'm trying to
use the word self to have a very clear definition of something that is if we person or human being are more general. But the self gives us this sense of temporal unity.
Yeah, it's just that, look, I mean, the word self is used in every imaginable way. I mean, I've made a collection of 50 different uses at one point. I've just chosen to use it that way to bring out this.
And notice that 50 different ways that self is being used in these conversations. It is so complex, and just to reduce it down to an illusion is silliness, folly, donkey brained.
Interesting fact about very different experiences of time. That was my starting point.
Okay, so where then did it go from?
Well, actually, I have to say that I followed a pretty sort of academic philosophical route, and I know it did indeed lead me to the idea that if you really want to say that there are things, entities called selves, which are different from human beings, you may have to finish up saying they're very short-lived things. But
So what does that mean, short-lived?
Well, I started off saying maybe 3 seconds, and I thought, well, maybe less than a second, and then I even put forward the possibility that maybe they're as long as the Planck time, which is every self else 10 to the minus 43 of a second, which is a sort of flashing theory.
So that in a sense, you're trying to define the now. Is that a now in a physical sense?
Well, I suppose so, but you do have to distinguish between, as it were, the now of physics, insofar as they'll allow such a thing, and the lived now, the so-called specious present. There's a very good example of how the way in which that's longer than just a slice at an instant. And seeing a shooting star is a very good example, because you seem to see the whole thing in the present in some irreducible way.
Right. And so you're in essence trying to measure that.
Yeah, but there are a lot of themes going on here, and actually they're difficult to integrate. But that was one of the things I was thinking of.
So what are the implications? I mean, let's say I go along with you, and the self lasts a third of a second or 3 seconds, or I can live with that bracket of time. What are the implications of that?
Well, I suppose one thing to say
is that the only thing that's real during that time?
Yeah, I really don't want to support this view very much. I'm quite happy with the idea that if you want to distinguish the self from the human being, you can think of it as a brain system in your head that has fairly long-term existence. What's interesting, I think, is in the way different people live time. And I mean, time for confession. I am someone who is like this. I look back a minute, I just don't feel that I'm there. And other people just don't believe me, and then they say, well, you must be a very moral person because you're never going to feel responsible for what you do. So there are lots of problems there. People are very different. And I call the long-termers the diachronic people and the short-termers the episodic people. And I think if you think about your friends for a bit, you'll see that they do differ in this way. And I should say, if you find that your partner is the other kind of person, don't worry, because diachronic people, long-termers can get on perfectly well with short-termers. In fact, it can be a good thing.
So here's a person that is basically saying that selves have been used in about 50 different ways. The way that he would define the self is the way it experiences time, even if it's coming in blips, like boop, 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 boop. There's still an enduring self going throughout the person's life, right?
A human being who's in a permanent vegetative coma, is that person a self?
If it's, I don't know what to say. I mean, if they can be. You've raised a very controversial case, because it turns out that some of these people are aware and conscious.
Yes.
So I would say in that case they are, if they can be woken up or by some future medical procedure. If the potential is there, yes. If the potential's gone, no.
What are some core characteristics of self?
Well, I think I need to bring it to one thing that's worth saying is that we are talking on two levels, and it's very difficult to integrate them. One is the metaphysical level. What are they? How long do they last? The other is the experiential level. How long do you feel they last?
And notice right here that he's welcoming in the conversation of metaphysics, which takes him out of any type of hard materialism, naturalism, atheism.
So, okay, but if you ask what are the core characteristics of self, well, the first one is easy. You're a subject of experience. You're engaged in mental activity.
So there you go. You're a subject of that experience. You're a self. He believes it's kind of blipping in and out. Let's go to the next one. Let's go to the Robert Tillis one. This is really good, and it's one of my favorites right here.
Let's start at basics. What is consciousness?
The question, what is consciousness, is not as basic as it sounds, and it's a much contested area. But I would like to have affirmative action for the ground floor of consciousness, qualia. These are sensations, feelings of warmth, feelings of cold, sense of brightness, and so on and so forth. This is the ground floor of consciousness that many philosophers of consciousness try to ignore or to eliminate, because it is the most difficult part of consciousness, actually, to assimilate into a materialist world picture, into the idea that consciousness is due to brain activity. But that's just the ground floor. There are many other obvious aspects of consciousness, particularly in human consciousness, and obviously beliefs, memories, thoughts, and so on, as well as emotions. All of these are aspects of consciousness. But the important bit that you mustn't, as it were, lose is the ground floor, the basic stuff, the qualia.
Now, some philosophers will eliminate that by claiming that consciousness is an illusion. We have different afferent sensations, vision, sound, tactile, internal memories, and these are all sort of competing in our brain, and they give us the illusion of consciousness because all of these are flowing in, and we think we have this unified pattern.
Consciousness can't be an illusion, of course, because to have the illusion of being conscious is being conscious. I mean, this is just a variant, basically, of Descartes' cogito argument. But the things they tend to regard as illusory are ground floor bits of consciousness, like qualia, or even items such as beliefs and thoughts and so on. They think that these items belong to a folk psychology that a science of consciousness will eventually do without. But their attempts to get rid of these things seems to me have proved entirely unsatisfactory.
Well, why do so many first-rate philosophers then believe that? They eliminate the concept of consciousness, and once they do, of course, then it's very easy to associate brain states with the mind.
I think they make the fundamental and very common error of confusing methodological limitations with an account of what is there. If you can't measure something, or if you can't subject it to scientific investigation, so they feel, then it doesn't really exist. But that, of course, is nonsense. To argue that something as fundamental as the feeling of warmth that I'm having now doesn't exist is a pretty desperate remedy to try and include all of consciousness within the methodological limitations of scientific psychology.
Well,
So do you see what he just said there? That they try to do methodological naturalism, and they run into walls, they run into contradictions, and they don't want to admit it, and they just go donkey brained ahead, and they act like they've solved the problem by denying everything that causes them to have that problem come back. So I'm not really a self. I'm not really experiencing this. It seems like I'm experiencing it, but it's really just my brain state, and that brain state is called a consciousness or some type of an existence, but it's not really a self. The self is an illusion of that. I mean, it just gets into donkey brained ideas, and here you just have other agnostics and atheists admitting that this brings you into nothing but contradiction.
I think what they do is they say that, yeah, you have these feelings, but you have the feeling that there's a central actor inside that is having these feelings, when rather they are happening by themselves, and as they do in sequence, we're only sensing a very small part of what's happening. Most of what's happening is subconscious, or we're only attending to one thing. There's so many things happening. So we have this illusion that we're in charge of what we're doing, and it's really different brain states that are competing for this.
Certainly, there are many things that underlie my moment of consciousness, of which I'm unconscious. Just when, for example, I go for a walk to the pub, I'm not conscious of all my muscles contracting. Even less am I conscious of the molecular events that are happening in my muscles to make it possible for me to walk to the pub.
And this is what Sam Harris was talking about, like you can lose yourself in meditation and come back to it. But once again, that would be an observation of the self. And so he's talking about, yes, we can become more or less aware of these states, but that doesn't mean that it's not fundamental to everything we're doing based on our awareness, even like we're sleeping. So the other person was saying, like, possibly you could lose a self if you don't have brain waves. And that's his contradiction that he's going to go into, because brain waves don't make the self interacts with those brain waves.
It doesn't mean to say that I'm not really walking to the pub. So in other words, I'm not in a state of illusion to believe that I'm doing that. It's just that there are many mechanisms upon which my voluntary action depends.
The focus of the illusion is not the muscularity and the many thousands, if not more, things that are going on that you're not aware of, but it's the I. It's the illusion of the I that senses that. That's the illusion.
It's interesting that those who tried to dispose of the I are quite remarkable egos themselves. But even rather non-egocentric characters like David Hume ran into a lot of trouble when they tried to dispose of the I. When you think of the famous passage in his treatise on human nature, he says, when I look into the flow of my consciousness, I see a succession of perceptions, but I don't see anything corresponding to I.
Right.
That sentence has got at least 3 instances of I in it. So clearly the I that is David Hume is a real thing, but it isn't just a mere percept. It isn't just a particular mechanism in the brain. It isn't a CEO, as Daniel Dennett would say, acting within consciousness. It is something that is diffusely but really present.
Let's go into, what's that mean, diffusely but really present? It sounds like if you go too diffuse, it's not really present.
A lot of things are diffuse and real. My sense of the world around me is pretty diffuse, but it is inescapably real. But this I that I am is an absolutely fundamental intuition. It isn't something that is reducible to anything else. That I am, and that I am this person currently talking.
It's not reducible to anything else. Okay, just a few more. Let's go to Ned Block here. Let's go to Ned Block.
One from the other, so we can really see what this thing is that we're trying to explain.
I think it's a really important question. And I like to see things in terms of 2 different distinctions. One is phenomenal consciousness versus access consciousness. So phenomenal.
Okay, hold on. Looks like we have someone here, as I'm going through it. Consciousness itself is just something matter is capable of when it has the organs for it. I don't see why matter itself has to be separate from. That's the entire problem, my friend. You don't see why it has to be separate. It is impossible for it to be unified with matter. It's impossible. It would be like you saying, well, I don't see why someone can't be a married bachelor. I mean, these words married and bachelor, they just seem to work together. Married bachelor. It's impossible for your consciousness to be coming from matter in motion. It would be meaningless and madness. And yet you are not right now writing out meaningless and madness statements. The very fact you are doing it is arguing against the point you just made. You are self-refuting. And that's what all of these people are saying. And they're coming against this view that you have and the popularization of it that's happening from some smart people who make other people think they have to follow them because they're smart. I'm playing you a bunch of other smart people who are not even Christians who agree with me that what Dennett and Harris and others like yourself who are spouting this nonsense, it is nonsense. Just like Tillis, just what we just heard here from Tillis. Let me just play it again, okay? Just like Tillis said here, that when even Hume tried to deny his self, his ego, and he said a little joke here, Tillis, and I'll slow it down a little bit. I always listen to things at double speed, so I got it at 1.5 or 1.75 for you guys here, right? He says most of the people he knows, and I'm thinking of Dennett and Harris and these guys and Rosenburg, who deny the ego, the I, right? They actually have the biggest egos, and they talk the most about I. So listen to him say this again here.
Things are diffuse and real. My sense of the world around me is pretty diffuse, but it is inescapably real. But this I that I am is an absolutely fundamental intuition. It isn't something that is reducible to anything else. That I am, and that I am this person currently talking, this body from which I'm talking, is something that I cannot, without self-refutation, deny.
I'm not sure that's
See, I cannot do it without self-refutation. Why is that? Back up to when he talks about the ego.
Acting within consciousness. It is something that is diffusely but really present.
let's go into what does that mean, diffusely but really present. It sounds like if you go
Those of the I are quite remarkable egos themselves.
Here we go.
clarity in the many thousands, if not more, things that are going on that you're not aware of, but it's the I. It's the illusion of the I that senses that. That's the illusion.
It's interesting that those who tried to dispose of the I are quite remarkable egos themselves. But even rather non-egocentric characters like David Hume ran into a lot of trouble when they tried to dispose of the I. When you think of the famous passage in his treatise on human nature, and he says, when I look into the flow of my consciousness, I see a succession of perceptions,
Yes.
but I don't see anything corresponding to I.
Right.
That sentence has got at least 3 instances of I in it. So clearly the I that is David Hume is a real thing, but it isn't just a mere percept. And it isn't just
Exactly. Now, what's so funny about that is I can do that same exact thing with Rosenburg in his book. When he comes to the end and he denies the I and he calls it an illusion, you can then go back to the beginning of his book. And I think he uses the word I like about 100 times. So I'm going to just hang here just for a minute for sentient being. Very cool name there. Let me go here to my Amazon. Anybody have any questions before I play out these last few that we have? Give me just a moment here. Let's see. Oops, let's take this off here. Let's go here. Don't want that to get out. Okay. How do I bring this back? I bring this back by add to stage. Okay. Oh, I got to go here. Read Kindle Online. Okay, where's my Kindle Online? Kindle Reader. Yeah, Alex Rosenburg. Oh my gosh, dude. I just took this off of something. Now it's telling me that I have it here. I will have to remove it to be able to make my point, but he denies the I writing the I. Okay, so let me go back here to where were we at? Ned Block. Let's go.
Phenomenal consciousness is what I really mean by consciousness. It's the what its likeness of experience, the redness of red, as Christoph Koch likes to say. Access consciousness is what we do with that phenomenal consciousness when we put it into our cognitive system, when we apply concepts to it and think and reason using the contents of perception. So that's access consciousness. The other distinction that I like to use is the distinction between the content of consciousness. So, for example, red, the experience of red versus the experience of green, versus what makes that content conscious as opposed to unconscious, as opposed to unconscious perception. One of the developments in the last 10 years has been we're much more certain now that there really is unconscious perception. We can unconsciously represent something as red. And we know how to do that now in a very reliable.
Let me get to you right here. So your argument hinges on the idea that for there to be an illusion, colloquially speaking, you must be separate from matter. Why is that? Exactly, because you have to observe it. So if everything was an illusion, what you're experiencing right now is an illusion, you would have no differentiation now between reality and illusion. It would all be illusion, and including the one observing the illusion. So just think about it like this. If everything is red, you are red, and you don't know the difference between anything not being red because it's impossible for you to recognize it because you are, if anything else were to be red, it would be impossible for you to recognize it because built into your system, you've already acknowledged that you're red and that everything you see is red. So you've just closed yourself off from anything being blue. You have to have an observer that is not illusory to understand illusion. And this is why, like, if you remember, I think it was like National Geographic had like one of those brain game shows, and you'll see them all the time on TikTok or whatever, where it's like, stare at this picture, it's a colored picture, and then they'll remove it and it'll be a black and white picture, but your brain will keep seeing the color. The only reason why you can do that is because you're an observer of those two different images. If you didn't have a self, there would be no perceptual difference between either one of those pictures. Both of them would be an illusion. And then not only would the illusory state make everything meaningless, what we're doing now, discussing illusion, that's why Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. There would be no way for you to distinguish between rationality and irrationality. You wouldn't know the difference between 2 + 2 being 4 and 2 + 2 being 5. Because once again, yourself would be an illusion. Now, if they say that somehow hard math and science can still be, which Alex Rosenburg does say, and even like others like that, like Harris, believe like somehow you can still do science and math while having an illusory state, you give no grounding for any of those things. And you're denying what's actually observing those things. So you don't have a ground for math. Why does math work? Why do chemicals in my brain function in such a way that I can understand gravity out there, something way out there that's not tested in a lab where I see numbers floating around, whatever the equation for gravity is? How do my chemicals here write down equations that then correspond to that? So that would be the first problem. And then the second thing is, how do I know I'm now looking at that correctly and managing those numbers and those tests that I'm doing? So in other words, doing more science doesn't prove science. Doing more science doesn't remove any illusion, because if you start off with you are an illusion, you end at illusion, and everything in between is an illusion. Now, let me just put up here these couple of things that I wanted to share about how it contradicts itself. So let me show Alex Rosenberg's book, The Atheist Guide to Reality, and just how this comes out into insanity here. Okay, so give me just a second. Let me put this here. I can share this up here. Let me put this back, and I'll get to your comment there. Let's go entire screen. Okay, I'll be sharing the audio too. Okay, so now look at this. This is David Hume, which, I mean, I could go here and show it here, but since I mentioned Alex Rosenberg, let's go here at the end of his book, where he declares the I to be an illusion. Okay, let's just make sure I'm checking in so you guys can see that I'm using the book properly. The self, the person, the I inside the body is an illusion along with all the others. Okay, so there isn't a you, there isn't a me, a him, or a her. You're not even a him or a her. So don't worry about death, because you're not even a person. Okay, right? You tracking there? Now watch. Let's search how many times he uses the word I. Okay, it's probably going to take a little while here to search it. Let's see, I'm trying to hit enter here. Hopefully it'll give me an I. Let's put you. See if it'll search you. Telling me that there's you. I mean, the word you is right here. Why is this search function not working? Give me just a second. I, search function, the I. Maybe it's going to take a minute. Let me look at your question while you're doing this, or your chat here. My argument against that is that survival benefits from having a coherent view of what is around you. Evolution would select animals without inaccurate senses, but that senses is not consciousness and self. You have to put I with quotations. Okay, thank you. That's the problem there. Let's go back to that. I. Boom. Oh, very cool. There we go. Thank you. Love being on here. So I is used 128 times, right? Let's look at the word you. How many times is that used? Did I not need? Maybe I didn't need that there. Okay. I'm literally looking at the word you right here, and then it's not telling me that it's found in there. So why is that not working? Let me try that like you did that one more time. Okay. Why are you not finding the word you? So I know it's kind of like a lame thing, but I just wanted to make my point, but I think the point was made, right? What? Let me go back into this book. Sorry, guys, that I'm nerding out on finding the word you here. Okay, that doesn't even make any sense. You see I'm searching right here, the word you, and then right here is the word you. And here I did I, and it actually worked, came up 128 times. Okay, and here's some of the sentences. Up to me which way I will decide. So here he's even using it as an I will decide. There is a more fundamental idea of free will than the conscious feeling that's up to me which way I will decide. Here he goes, the doctrine, dare I say, designed, the person, the I, then it goes back to being an illusion, see? So he denies the very thing. I think senses are a huge part of consciousness. If someone is born blind, color means a lot less to them. Yes. So remember, I believe that conscious states, or the state of consciousness, is a attribute of the self. So the self has gradients of consciousness and states of it regarding different things, like a dream state of consciousness, a flow state while you're working or going into your sports. Like I like to snowboard, getting into a flow state of consciousness. And so learning states of consciousness, what your brain is doing while it's learning. So everything that I believe that consciousness is doing is grounded in that observer, the self, just like we're learning here. And I'm going to try it one more time for you. and I will give up after this. Yeah, can't find it. Okay, so now let's go back here to what this gentleman's saying. If anybody has any questions or comments, let me know.
Way. I mean, that's been one of the big advances.
Blindsight. And
Well, more interestingly than blindsight, I think is binocular rivalry.
Yeah.
And in particular, so binocular rivalries, you get a stimulus in one eye and a stimulus in the other eye. And then your whole visual field is occupied first by one image and then by the other image, with small periods in between where there's a bit of patchy combination. And Christoph Koch and Nao Tsuchiya developed a procedure called this odd name of continuous flash suppression, which isn't very descriptive, but what it is they figured out that if you put a really fast-moving colored stimulus in one eye, what was in the other eye would be unconsciously perceived for up to 2 or 3 minutes pretty reliably.
So basically what he's just going on about is that there's two ways to look at it, not just one way of consciousness. And that's kind of going into what I was saying. And he's just going to describe that a little bit more. And then let me get to this question. I don't want to ignore it. Let me just let him finish his thought. And then I will comment on his thought, tie it all together from those we listened to. And then I'll take any questions or debates anybody wants to bring up on any of the subjects scrolling across the bottom. Okay.
Unless you blink. And the effect of that is we can now look at unconscious perception in a reliable way. It's really been a terrific tool. And we can ask the question what the difference is between conscious and unconscious perception. And also there's been a lot of advances in the question of what makes a person conscious as opposed to unconscious. And so the neural bases of these different things are somewhat different. So we now know that the neural basis of the consciousness of a person is something to do with the connectivity between the cortex, the sort of modern human
coming outside
of the brain, and the thalamus, a structure right in the middle of the brain. So it's connectivity of that seems to underlie the difference between a conscious human being and somebody in a persistent vegetative state.
Here's one of the problems with the word consciousness. In this case, we're using consciousness almost as a synonym for wakefulness or sleep or attention, as opposed to the inner subjectivity of the inner movie that we so-called see. So
but I think it's not
related.
And see, now that's where, once again, we're going to get into the self. The self is experiencing these conscious states, the conscious states.
It's related. It's not exactly this connectivity is about the subjectivity, not about wakefulness, because we have that subjectivity in some forms of sleep with that connectivity intact.
So how would that work? Meaning like in dreaming?
Yeah, like in dreaming, yeah.
And so with that connectivity intact, you still have the subjectivity in dreaming.
Yes, and it is the underlying basis of it is the connectivity between the cortex and the thalamus.
And if that's interrupted through trauma or something?
Then you're in the vegetative state.
Yeah, and therefore it's not just you're not only not perceiving, you're not behaving.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So you can't create the so-called philosophical zombie in biological creatures.
That's right. Yeah. But there are zombie states in biological creatures, as Christoph has shown. For example, we have two visual systems: a dorsal visual system across the top of the head, which is an unconscious visual system, and then a conscious visual system on this part of the head. And so the top of the head system is a zombie system. So we do have a certain zombie-ish aspect of that we have ourselves.
So with so much of our physiology devoted to non-conscious, I don't say unconscious, but non-conscious activities, and consciousness being, when you really think about it, it seems to be our whole world. Everything we do. The more you think about it, the less and less it actually encompasses of what our brain does. Our whole cerebellum, small brain in the back, does coordination, a whole lot of other things. And so little of the brain seems related to what we think is everything in consciousness.
That's right.
The brain's getting filled up, and we still can't find consciousness.
Yeah. Well, that leads one to wonder just how important, from the point of view of utility and evolutionary heft consciousness has. It might be that it's a kind of afterthought.
Do you think that's possible?
I don't think so. No.
So you think consciousness has had a very strong selective benefit?
I would guess so. Yeah. I think there are some things it's better to do unconsciously. For consciousness is slow, so that's why we have the dorsal visual system. It's much faster, and it allows us to move through the world, weaving in and out, and faster than thought.
The glass is on the table and it's hit and it drops.
Yeah,
and I'll pick it up, and then when I have it in my hand, I'm conscious of it.
That's right. Yeah. Exactly.
So we're able to make those kinds of decisions.
Yeah.
It's hard to judge was I consciously doing that.
Yeah.
But it's certainly it certainly it's not my normal conscious state.
Right. Yeah.
So do you think then therefore consciousness is an accident of evolution? If we ran the tape of evolution again, would it always produce consciousness?
The unconscious systems we have are inflexible. There's a really good chapter in DeHaan's book. I disagree with most of his view, but on what consciousness does for us and what things we can do consciously that we can't do unconsciously. And the basic difference is what we can do unconsciously is fairly inflexible and unsophisticated. So, for example, he shows that one-step reasoning can be done unconsciously, but to do two-step reasoning, you need consciousness.
That's interesting. And so, therefore, that would indicate a very strong selective benefit. If you had a trade, if you saw a predator over there, you could run from it. But if the predator was hiding in that 2 steps, you would be in trouble unless you had something else.
That's right. Yeah.
So you would say that although consciousness is an accident of evolution, it is something that is at least has a benefit that would, if it occurred accidentally, would be selected for it. I think, would that be your position?
My guess is that we need it for something important. Maybe it first of all, for example, for motivation. But then once we had it, it turned out to be quite useful. That's what I would guess.
All right, there you go. So whether you see it emergent, which I at times give people the ability to use an emergent argument for consciousness, it is not simply only reducible down to the brain states, because it needs to have observation and it needs to have awareness. And so just simply saying that it's reacting to senses and so forth doesn't give you an observer of the qualia. So that was more of his take, wasn't as knockdown drag out as some of the others. But here is the chart that I was mentioning, and now I'll just summarize. So people, and I got questions here I'll start taking after this. So people who act like Christians are trying to smuggle in God through the self and consciousness being something that is not merely caused by brain states, but has to be attributed to other things, or at least have those other things be investigated, because it's not as simple as Daniel Dennett, Sam Harris, and Alex Rosenburg are making out without contradicting themselves left and right. There is now a entire group that I have introduced you to, if you didn't know them already, to now study and see that in many places they're going to agree with me and what I'm saying. Here we go. Thomas Nagel, atheist, non-theist, the self is real and it's subjective experience. It requires a point of view. And this is that famous writing, What Is It Like to Be a Bat? Glenn Strawson, that's what we talked about. The self, we had him here. That is that the self is absolutely real. It's not an illusion. And that illusionism is incoherent, the self and materialism. John Cyril, who I don't think we went through today, he says the self is real. It's not a narrative trick. Eliminating the subject destroys the ontology of mind, rediscovery of the mind. David Chambers, who we went through here, which was very interesting. And he, I believe, is an idealist as well, at least leaning that way, though a lot of these talks don't get into all of those details. Illusionism eliminates the dauntum. It must explain. Here he wrote, The Conscious Mind, the Meta Problem of Consciousness. Ned Block, who we went to here at the end, who was just a little bit more friendly towards both sides, wasn't really a knockdown drag out for either way, but he is basically saying that we cannot deny that experience. We can't call it an illusion. We have to come up with other understandings of it. So on confusion about function of consciousness, Raymond Tillis, whose book that I was talking about at one point, The Aping of Mankind, probably had the strongest towards what I was saying, that was bringing up that even if you deny the ego, you have the ego, and you start getting into this spiral of contradiction. Colin McQuinn, we didn't get to him. Atheist itself is real but mysterious. Eliminatism explains nothing. That's like illusionism. Consciousness is irreducible. Philip Goff, I don't believe I went to him either. He says, and he used to be a material self and consciousness are irreducible. Sam Coleman, Herbert Dreyfus, Sean Gallagher, and then Bernardo Kastrup, which we started off right here. Okay, this is what we started off here with this interview with Alex O'Connor and Paul Davies. I don't think I had Paul Davies, but I mentioned his book, The Consciousness is Real and Irreducible. Okay, so I didn't have time to get in all of that. Okay, now give me percentage of philosophers who fit into basic categories of Platonist, hard materialist, panpsychist, idealist, etc. Okay, now we'll start answering some questions as I put that up there. Hey, I think senses are, oh yeah, I already went to that. Do you know anything about Avittita, Vendetta, or this kind of Buddhism? Eastern traditions have delved and evolved incredibly detailed perspectives of the self. Yes, I believe here I have, and remember, Buddhism came out of Hinduism. So there are some similarities. I believe I have that here. Let me see. Let me go to that. Yes. Oh, no, sorry. I have Vispana meditation. Let me just come out of this. Vispana meditation and action. And the DVD here on the Dharma Brothers teaching this meditation to prisoners, trying to get that to check in. So no, I haven't dealt with that specifically, but I understand the Buddhist way of looking at it in a nutshell. And Sam Harris actually identifies this, and that's why many Buddhists consider themselves somewhat atheists or agnostic. Okay, and that's why I think Harris adopted it. So it's basically like the self is an illusion, but you have to start with whatever you have in that illusion to lose yourself to get to that which is real, which is not an illusion. And that's where the contradiction lies, is because if I'm having to acknowledge the self to then lose the self, we're now going back into that cycle. Okay. So just like in the paradigm we just learned with Alex Rosenburg, if I come to the end of the book and I'm no longer a self, and that's the grand conclusion, then what was I all the way up until that point understanding the book, right? So this idea of coming to nothingness or to some type of a nirvana that is in a sense like a nothingness is in of itself a somethingness. It is bearing the attributes of something, and we're just calling it a different name. And then the meditation of what they're calling losing the self is actually not losing the self. What you're doing with the self is you're entering into different states of consciousness about the self. So the self is the observer of these conscious states. And then it kind of like, you could think of like a value, like a chart. I'm trying to think of like a thermometer rather. It's going up and down in those states. And as you're becoming less aware of yourself and more into the meditation or whatever you're meditating on, you're entering to a different conscious state. But you're directing that with the self. The self has never lost. You've never lost yourself, because if you lost yourself, you would never come back. Okay. So this is kind of just some little simple things to show people on both sides, whether it's meditative or just like the atheist. If there is no such thing as the self and it's an illusion, you who are meditating, when you would come into the place of losing the self entirely, you would not be able to come back. But you enter in and out of your meditative states. That shows you that yourself was there and was able to interact with those various states. The atheist, then it would be the same thing. If we're not a self, then doom scrolling or anything addictive, our food eating and all of that, we would become mindless zombies just eating and having sex or doing something like that, or just doom scrolling and never clicking out, because the self has to be aware of where it's at to be able to click out of that. Now, do people struggle with self-discipline and those things? Absolutely, because different states of consciousness interact with the body and what we would call addictive behavior and so forth. But in the midst of that behavior, the self is still there. Okay. Now let me just show this to you real quick, and why this is so important, because I see you interacting here, and I want to show this to you, because one of the things that we're now learning in therapy is that to not treat the person like they are simply materialistic and a product of their DNA, an aping mind. So like I showed with you here, Tillis's book, The Aping Mankind, and he calls it like hard Darwinism, when all you see is, anything you can point to, you only believe what you can point to in a laboratory. He called that Darwinization. Then you lose the self, and then you become an aping mind living merely by instinct, right? And he says this is the worst thing that we can do to ourselves, right? Okay, well, the reason why this is such a problem is what they are now finding out. And you can look at Dr. Amen. He's done over, I believe, 150,000 brain scans. And he talks about that when you see the problem in the brain, and one of the things that they do in their clinics, the Amen clinics, is that they show the patient their brain, the damage. And I'll get to some of the brain damage here in just a moment, okay? They'll show the patient what's actually going on inside of these scans. And then what they'll do is help them to understand how they can trigger healing mechanisms through cognitive brain therapy, CBT, and how they can begin to interact with the brain that they're scanning through their mental states and actually make changes. Okay. So let me see if I can show you here a little bit of some of his brain scans. Here we go. So when you start looking at the brain, and he's done the most brain scans, okay, what he'll start to teach them is that you can make impact into the activity of this brain by beginning to focus on certain aspects of your mental life. Okay. Now, giving you exercises. Okay. So you can actually exercise your brain. Now, if you weren't a self, there would be no way that you could look at your brain outside of you and then to interact with it and to actually bring about change. But you can begin to do these things, and then in your brain scans, your brain physically will begin to look different. So you see, you're not yourself. That's just one of the evidences that you're not yourself. And then Jeffrey Schwartz as well, you are not your brain. Okay. And I got, every time I touch on books here, I have them set up somewhere else. So I run into those problems. But you are not your brain. You can see how he gets around that. Okay, give me just a second here. I know I'm getting lost. I'm going to try to be brief here. Okay. I have a question, my brother. If consciousness is separate from matter, why does brain damage do the things it does, like lobotomy, as an example? Because there's correlation. When God, and this is where I insert God, when God made us to correlate with these things. So the question would be basically like this. Why does a pianist need a piano if they already know all the sounds and they already know all of the notes? Why do they need the piano? Why just can't they just do it on their own? Okay. Well, God didn't make a world where a pianist makes sounds like a piano without a piano. It uses the piano to make those sounds. So you might be saying, why are we not just disembodied souls doing whatever angels do and other disembodied persons? Well, God made us in a body. Now that we are in this state, we are inseparable from that connection. And so there's no way around it. This is now, and then we look at the damage and things like this. We now call this the fallen state because our physical body is not in line with our soulical mind and ourself. And that's why if you look at it, you can just take the opposite view of that. If we were just our brain, then why are we not happy with ourselves? Why am I not happy with my little double chin as I get older? If I'm just physical processes, why do I have a self-image? Why do I think I should be better? Why do these psychological things come into our lives and mess with us? That if we were just these mechanical objects, that we would have no real connection to life or death or meaning in the world and all of these things. And yet we do have them. And if someone now wants to say, well, animals have them. Now, remember, the Bible also says that animals have a subjective experience as well. The Bible actually talks about this, especially land dwelling animals or some sea creatures where there's breath. And we think about breath as a sign of some type of a conscious state. So things that are breathing in the way that we would look at breathing, generally with lungs and need air to breathe, not just talking about insects, but talking about mammals and so forth, dolphins, dogs, etc., seem to have quite an advanced state of what's going on. And so God made them like this. So you would think of like an animal being the closest thing to a human in a conscious state, but it shares with us our physical state. An angel would be the closest to us in our soulical state, but doesn't have a physical body. So a brain doesn't have an animal doesn't have a human soul. Animals don't have human souls, but they have flesh like humans. We share the same kind of flesh, right? Angels have a soul very much like us, if not identical, and yet they don't have physical states. And so here we are between the animal, the mere animal without the kind of soul that we have, and an angel that has the kind of soul we have without a body. And so this is the unique state that we're in. When we're disembodied, we can be free from all of these connections, all these causations we can be free from. We can be free from loss of memory. We can be free from trauma, anxiety, etc. And what's neat, as I was just showing you before, this connects to it, is that we can use the self as a higher understanding of who we are supposed to be to impact the brain. So one of the things they do in anxiety treatment is to see yourself as not being anxiety, but having anxiety like you would have a hangnail or something. So you detach yourself from that. Whereas if all you were these brain states, then you would be anxious. You would be in panic. There would be nothing to change. This would be a part of your experience as a human. And yet we have found out through psychological cognitive brain therapy, psychological training, that you can retrain the brain with the self to react to these different stimuli and traumas, fear of flying, and so forth, or like we would think of like OCD and other words. Here's somebody just giving us a great understanding that the Spirit itself bears witness with our spirit that we are children of God. Our spirit is a true self present with Jesus Christ when our body crumbles and dies. Amen. And I believe that when we get deep into this conversation, that's the only explanation for all of this. And we call that parsimonious, that the Christian explanation of the soul and the spirit and our existence and knowledge and creation, it's all together in one answer. So for example, if you're talking to an atheist, they're going to have to give you one kind of worldview or an idea about how things came to be. You know, Richard Carrier was debating inspired philosophy on Modern Day Debate, and he was just jumping from one idea to the next. At one point, how did the universe start? From a nothing bubble. That's literally what he was talking about. Oh, and then how do we have morals? Oh, we get oughts from ises because of design and purpose, and yet the bubble originally had no design and purpose. So you see, like, he'll start borrowing all of these worldviews. He'll start rather patching together all of these worldviews, borrowing ones from another, especially the Christian worldview, to kind of make this patchwork here, where the Christian just says it's always God. Okay, so why is there something rather than nothing? God. Why are humans so unique? God. Why do we have morals? God. Why is there information in the world? God. As I was talking here at the beginning about the holographic principle, and how the more we're making AI and the more we're doing things with information, the more that we're realizing is that the world is like a holograph. And it's not that this is not to say, and I'm trying to get the focus there. This is not to say that God can't create it like a hologram, because I can say this is God's second reality, right? But the idea is to show people that underlying all of this is information. And then when you go to more information, there's more information. You get one level of information, then you get to the next level, next level, next level. Okay, not that Harris as an Advantian, but he believes what is ultimately stated in, and let me just get this word here up here, Adventia. Got it? Let me just start a new chat with that so I can see that. ADVATA, explain and show how it is self-refuting with the belief of self. And I'll just put my ID here because I think I've already gone through this. I just don't remember the name. Yes, here is the clearest explanation. Anything is wrong, please feel free to correct it. Okay, the core claim, only Brahma, pure, undifferentiated consciousness is real. The world, the body, the individual self, the ego are illusions. Okay, the truth self, Atman. Yes, I've studied this, but I don't remember this name. But yes, this is very reminiscent of things that I've studied, that all is Brahma, right? Okay, and it's not personal, no individual, not a subject with thoughts or desires. Okay, now the problem with this is that if Brahma is not a self, how are selves in Brahma? Okay, so that's one of the arguments that I bring to my Hindu friends as we start to get into all becoming Brahma and their different variations of this. Okay. And my friend who gave me this book, Vispana Meditation, was once a Hindu. His family was Hindu. He's my neighbor. I have a lot of Hindu neighbors around here. And so one of the things is if everything comes into a mindless force, and we can just call that God, how does this mindless force have minds within it? Because remember, you're losing yourself to go join with the non-self, right? But right now you have a mind. You have that. You have all of the attributes of the definition of a self. And that's why it contradicts itself, okay? So let me show it to you. Illusion, and I mentioned this before, always requires somebody being deceived. So if right now you come to this understanding, oh man, I'm not a self. I'm being deceived to think I'm a self. I'm really not a self. What were you 5 seconds before you discovered you weren't a self? What were you? Right? So now if what you were 5 seconds ago is now contradicted by what you just learned now, there's no way to know what you know now is true, because now you have undercutted everything behind you. So there is no rationality. In other words, if you come to the place where the self is an illusion, math is an illusion. So you can't do math. If you come to the place that self is an illusion, you can't have personal identity. You might as well just give me all of your money and stare at a rock for the rest of your life and then die. And please don't hear that as a challenge. I don't want anybody to die. But I actually have the book. I was reading it. The guy who came up with trying to defeat suicidalism and atheism, and he couldn't. He tried, but he couldn't. The only question left is, why not suicide? Camus. I was reading Camus' book. Let's get his book. Camus' book on suicide. Okay, I think it's a free PDF here. Okay, so in the myth of Sisyphus, Camus declares suicide the only true philosophical problem because it's the ultimate response to absurd. To the absurd, lights clash between our desire for meaning and a silent, meaningless universe, right? And I was reading through it and highlighting the different things. I think here you can get it on PDF. Yeah. And so I was reading through it, and he doesn't defeat absurdity. He doesn't. He basically, and let me just let me get my summary up here of how he does it. Okay. Let me just get a new chat here. How does Camus, whatever. How does Camus defeat suicide in a meaningless world? 2 sentences. Use direct quotes. Okay, here we go. Here's how he defeats it. There is but one and only serious question. Yeah, we already got to that. And he basically says, embrace life. Yeah, that's what it was. And that's what Rosenburg does as well. Embrace life without illusions. We defeat suicide through defiant revolt, embracing life without the illusion. The point is to live. And so you kind of fight this sense that life is meaningless with a meaning, but at the end of the day, you know it's still meaningless and it's all an illusion. Did he really defeat it? Come on, man. Maybe you're just, at this point, you're just playing make-believe. See, here's the difference. When people look at us as Christians and you think that we are living in some fantasy or that we're living in illusion, literally, that's what you believe. You see, we don't believe in illusion. We don't believe in fantasy in that way. You might say, well, you have all these mythological creatures, but remember, mythological things and talking snakes and all that. But remember, in our world, God can do that. So it's not an illusion. So the way I like to look at it is, if we've gotten so advanced that now we can make cartoons that talk, why can't God make actual, cartoon animals that talk? Why can't God make actual animals that talk? Why is this so hard? What parts are they missing now to be able to talk? You can even look at a parakeet or whatever those things, a parrot, rather, that repeats words after you, make sounds. Why can't these other animals make those sounds when God enables them to? You look at a donkey's brain, you look at a donkey's throat, you look at a donkey's a tongue and all of that. How far off is it from the ability to be able to talk if God gave it the ability to talk? Like, in other words, if God gave it a soul and connected those things in the brain to be able to talk, how hard would that be? See, so we're not living in this world of contradiction. We're not living in a world of illusion. We're just saying that God can do these things. God can split Red Seas. God can walk on water. God can raise from the dead. Like, we're not positing into this illusion. We're not positing circle squares, married bachelors. That's all we're doing. We're just saying God can do God things. But when you deny God and you get into this world of illusion, and I've said this before, and I'll show it here in the book, you now don't know the difference between anything being real and anything being an illusion. And that's where I was pointing out not only Hume's problem, but when Bertrand Russell points out Hume's problem of induction, that you cannot help believing that no belief can be grounded in reason. This is Bertrand Russell, History of Western Philosophy. Okay. And this is Bertrand Russell here, who wrote the book, Why I'm Not a Christian. And there is no way out of this. He gives no hope of getting out of this. Let me give you an example here in his book, Western Civilization, History, of Western Philosophy. Okay. It is therefore important to discover whether there is any answer to Hume within the framework of a philosophy that is wholly or mainly empirical. So things that we're just going to build on science, okay? And what Hume showed is that you can't merely build on science without the principle of science already being there, the regularity, tomorrow being like yesterday, regularity, all of these things, right? And Hume is the great skeptic, and Hume defeats everybody today thinking that they can do more science to get out of the problem of science. And Hume says you just can't. There's no way out of it. Because every time you say something like, well, water boils at this temperature, and I know that it boils at this temperature because I boiled it at this temperature, he basically brings up 2 points. Number one, you don't know tomorrow if water is going to have the same properties that it did today. So you didn't establish anything that would be fact. You just had an experience with that water today that happened to match yesterday, but you have now no proof that tomorrow will be like yesterday. In other words, this idea that tomorrow, just think of the words I'm saying, there's a tomorrow, and in that tomorrow, there's these rules, and there's this water, and there's this substance, and there's this fire, and all of these things. It's going to be the same like today. Everything I just said, put that in a package. You have nothing in science to prove that to you. How do I know with science tomorrow regularity laws will be the same? And then the second thing is, when I get there tomorrow and I begin observing those things, I have to now have a basis to start observing. So what that means is I think, therefore I am. All things being equal, the world is what it is. I'm not in an illusion, a brain in a vat. And I now can start doing X, Y, and Z things. But you have no ground for that. You have no intellectual difference between you being there and you not being there. You don't know if you're there or you're not there. There's nothing in a scientific experiment that can show you're here. You could be the brain in a vat. You could be in a dream. You could be in 100 different places, right? And then you have no foundation for the test and all the observations you did with 100 scientific friends, because somebody says, well, I'm going to get 10 other scientists to do it with me, and then we'll wake up tomorrow and then we'll know that we're not in the matrix. Well, all you've done is just talk to 10 people in the matrix that are relying upon the same things as you. You could have 1,000 people in the matrix. There's no way to know if you're in the matrix and then whether or not the matrix is going to be the same thing tomorrow. If you had 1,000 people, it doesn't matter. So Hume came to that point, and he tried to say we need to defeat this so we don't insert God, because there's no way that I can think of now to do this. And this is called the problem of induction. And people haven't defeated it as of yet, okay? And so it's important to discover whether there is any answer to Hume within the framework of philosophy that is wholly or mainly empirical, and there isn't. If not, now notice what Russell says here. If not, there is no intellectual difference between sanity and insanity. So if we don't defeat Hume's problem of induction, which is only using empirical science to prove our things, if we don't find a way out of just using science in this conundrum that we're in, we can't prove that we're here or tomorrow's going to be like today. If we can't get out of that, then there's no intellectual difference between sanity and insanity. Okay? Now, what sometimes people try to do is insert another principle that can somehow ground this, okay? And this is where Russell gets into this, without using God, rather, okay? Now notice what he says here. Let me find my mouse. The principle itself. So this principle that has to ground our regularity tomorrow, and that we're here actually in the real world, and that we're not a poached egg, okay? And he actually brings that up right here, that we could be a poached egg and not even know it. Where is this? Where he says here we could be a poached egg. Let me just look it up here. I just want to show you the word egg. It's in the same discussion. Egg. Okay. I guess he uses the word egg a lot. Okay. So here we go. It is therefore important to discover whether there is any answer to Hume within the framework of philosophy that is wholly empirical. Okay. I literally was right there at the same sentence. What is wrong with me? If not, there is no intellectual difference between sanity and insanity. This is the next sentence. Keep going. The lunatic who believes that he is a poached egg is to be condemned solely on the ground that he is in a minority, or rather, since we must not assume democracy, on the ground that the government does not agree with him. This is a desperate point of view, and it must be hoped that there is some way of escaping from it. And there is no way of escaping from it. And remember, simply saying more people tell you you're not a poached egg, that does not help. So just think of people in the matrix telling you you're not in the matrix. That does not help. How would you know if you're in the matrix? And then once again, look at the movie, you take a step out of the matrix, how you know you're not in another matrix? Because we can even do that now. Think about when you're in a video game and you play a game, right? And maybe you even see a TV show on the TV, you're watching the game. We can go worlds within worlds right now. This is not hard for us to imagine. So there is no way out of this spiral. In other words, okay. Now, the principle itself that grounds these things, of course, without circularity, the principle itself cannot, of course, without circularity, rather, be inferred by or from observed uniformities, since it is required to justify any such inference. It must therefore be or deduce from an independent principle not based on experience. So something must be the underlying principle that says no matter what you experience or what you are observing, this is how you know what you're observing is true. Otherwise, if everything you're looking at has to be experienced to be true, you'll never have the grounding to ground that very experience. You'll be going in an infinite regress. Okay. And I get to the end of his section. That's the end of it right there. There it is. Okay. From Roux to the present day. There you go. Just want to show you. Does he have it? By this time, does he have it? No. And they still don't have it. All it shows is what these arguments prove, and I do not think the proof can be controverted, so there's no way around this, is that induction, or another way of saying science, scientific method, is an independent logical principle. So he's just going to insert it there. It's an independent logical principle incapable of being inferred either from experience or from other logical principles. And without this principle, science is impossible. Okay. Now, just go right here. Unbiased. Okay. Unbiased is Russell special pleading here as an atheist. Okay. Is he special pleading? Yes. Boom. All he's basically doing is now saying, I can insert this principle willy-nilly and have no reason for it and don't have to prove it any other way with logic. That's it. That's the end. It's just a brute fact. It just is what it is. It is what it is. I can't think of anything else to fix this problem. So it just is what it is, because we know we do science, and we know life is regular, and we know that we somehow have meaning. So we just have to say that there's a principle outside of all other principles that can't be inferred from those principles nor deduced from other logical principles. It's just here. It's a brute fact. And now I feel better. Let's go on and do science again. Let's go on and do world again. Let's not kill ourselves. Let's not commit suicide. This is exactly what he's doing. My worldview needs X. X cannot be justified by any rational method, but I get to assume X without justification. There you go. Now, you might say, well, isn't God special pleading? No, because God, by definition, is the principle. I'm naming the principle based on the God that I worship. The principle is the Logos, Jesus, God in the flesh, showed us that he is the mind of God. The mind of Christ is the mind of the Father. And through him, all things were made. Without him, nothing was made that has been made. So even Satan himself, all of our bad days, all of our good days are possible because he has enabled a world that we exist in, can know ourselves, be observers, experience these laws. And if they weren't true and there was no laws, then we wouldn't know that to begin with. But since we do know there's laws, since we do know there's truth, then we know he is the truth giver. No one else can fit those parameters. So if you were to go to that children's game where you have to put in shapes, children's games with shapes, nothing else can fit into this shape or this God-shaped hole that we have except for God. If you're looking for a triangle, nothing else is going to fit in there appropriately except that triangle, right? And we'll just use that as the Father, Son, and Spirit. And so now somebody might say, well, what about other God beliefs? What about theistic beliefs all across the world? And how do you know yours is right? Well, now we go into a different conversation. But remember, I won't do that with an atheist until they acknowledge that their atheism is bankrupt. They can't do science. They don't know themselves, and that they can't overcome any of these problems. So I'm not skipping ahead with them to the thing that we're going to now talk about God and how Jesus raised from the dead, because they're still an aping mind. In their worldview, they're a self-denying their self. Okay, so here we go. You're right that Christians can explain everything more than atheists. After all, if there are gaps, you can fill it in with God. I won't deny that. I will deny its accuracy. No, you're saying you're going to deny the accuracy. It is accurate, because now notice, if God of the gaps is the only way to fill in these gaps, and then God gives us science and explanations, then everything I will ever understand ultimately comes from God. If all information, teleos, all design and information comes from God, then God isn't just the gap. God is the whole kit and caboodle. God is the whole thing. And so when we don't know something and we say God did it, we're not saying now we don't study it. It's like how John Lennox says, why is there water boiling in my kitchen? Well, you could say the scientific reason, well, water is boiling there because there's these materials, a teapot on top of a stove with fire, and the element of water at a certain heat is heating up. And that's one answer. The other answer is I wanted tea, so I put water in a pot. So God is never saying to us, let's not study and learn these things together. God says, let us reason together. God's made these seasons for us to learn from, stars to understand the world and all of this. And so God is making it discoverable. That's why the scientific revolution, and I have here the book by Tom Holland, recommend that to anybody, about how Christians did things that any other religion couldn't do. It's not like they just didn't have time to do it. No, they were not capable of doing it. What is Tom Holland's book here? I have it here. Holland. Yeah, Dominion. When you look at Dominion, it's not just that other religions didn't get around to it. It's that Christianity has it built into the system. And the problem, and another problem is that most of us and people listening to me is you've been brought up with this. So you're already assuming all of these Christian foundations and principles, but you don't even know where you got them from. You don't even know where they come from. Here's another one of my arguments that I bring up that I would love to have somebody run through here with me. So when you think about like naturalism itself and then how you're dependent upon these principles that we're talking about, one of the ways to show people that it's impossible for it to happen in naturalism alone is to get them to just see two categories, right? One is naturalistic answers, one is non-naturalistic. So if all I have is naturalism, then that means I can't appeal to metaphysics, because metaphysics would be non-natural. Okay, so if a Platonist or a panpsychic or somebody wanted to admit with me there's non-natural things, they can't be an atheist anymore in my worldview. If they try to do that, they're like a square circle now, married bachelor, right? So you show the naturalists, you either have naturalism or non-naturalism, right? Like it's either or. This is the law of the excluded middle, okay? And so it's one of these two things. If you can think of a third possibility, then I would just stop right here and have them give it to me. But it's either the world has only naturalism, and that is the only way of explaining everything, or there are things in the world that could be natural, but they can also be non-natural, okay? So that the explanation of things falls into two categories, natural or non-natural, right? Now, do you agree that some truths are necessarily true in every possible world, like the law of non-contradiction? Can you think of a place in a world, a multiverse, Doctor Strange, we just watched that with my kids, the madness of the multiverse. Can you think of any place conceivable where a thing cannot be a thing and a thing at the same time? Can you think of A and not A being the same? Can you think of something where there would ever be a time where the law of non-contradiction wouldn't apply, like in any universe, right? No, you can't. So yes, the law of non-contradiction has to be present everywhere minds go to understand and discern things, right? Well, now the simple thing is, do you believe that minds perceive things like the law of non-contradiction, or do you believe that just chemicals? Do you believe I can take chemicals out of my brain and have it perceive something called contradiction? Now, somebody might say, well, we'll look at computers. But remember, computers were programmed by people who already acknowledged the laws of non-contradiction. They didn't conceive it themselves. So it's just like God creating us, we created them, right? So no different. Now, if you can think of a way that non-minds and naturalism can perceive laws like non-contradiction, then we have to stop the conversation because we've entered a goofy town now. And as I just said, you can't use computers because computers were programmed to understand laws of non-contradiction that came from our minds. Our minds made those things. Now, would you then agree that minds don't invent these rules, we discover them? So we discovered non-contradiction. We discovered laws of identity. We discovered gravity. We discover things that are essential to our world. We're not discovering them. then would you agree that all of these things have to be in a unified set? And this is where you would exclude, say, Platonism, which just says that there are metaphysical things like truths out there, like laws of non-contradiction and mathematical laws and so forth. But do you agree that they have to be unified? Because otherwise, what does two do? What does law of non-contradiction do? In our minds, we see how it works because we unify them and we operate with them. So there's an operator unifying them. Would you agree that you need some type of an operation to unify data to make sense of these things? And once again, if you point to a computer, what is it doing? It's taking the data and the laws and the programs we gave it, and we're doing those same kinds of things. Well, then lastly, if you're not inventing all of these things, you're discovering them and they have to be unified, then what mind is carrying right now the cure to cancer that nobody has yet discovered? In other words, we'll discover the law of gravity. Who was carrying it in their mind before we discovered it? Did Albert Einstein invent, E equals mc squared, or did he discover it? If he discovered it in his mind, where was it before his mind? Okay. So where are all these truths, whether we discovered them? Where are they now unified? And where are all the undiscovered truths, like an invention, something coming to pass in the next year? If you don't have a unifying and a grounding factor for this information, you go into chaos. But since we now discover things, we know we discover things, since we see a unified principle of the things that we discover, whether it's like the woman inventing Spanx or the Apple phone, these operate on principles that existed before Steve Jobs, but the invention was unique to him and unified around those things. What is the grounding principle for all that we're doing in that knowledge? It's not our mind. Our mind is a part of it. And then you think about it sometimes. You forget something in your mind, but then you'll remember it, right? So what's going on with all of that information? Now you've come to the point where it's either naturalism or non-naturalism. How do we now ground all of those things we just discovered? Can't do it in naturalism because the necessity of these truths and all of their reasoning cannot be found in any mind made of matter. So now you only have left is that there's a mind like ours, but it's not limited in matter and space-time like ours, and it's discoverable with our mind as we operate and get closer to it. And then that's where you now see the logical deduction. Premise 1, necessarily truths exist and they are independent of finite minds. Premise 2, necessarily truths are perfectly unified into one coherent system. Premise 3, a perfectly unified system of necessary truths requires a single necessarily unified ontological foundation. Premise 4, no natural, physical, or emergent entity has the metaphysical capability to ground necessarily truths or their perfect unity. Conclusion, therefore, naturalism is false, and the ground of necessarily truths is in a necessarily existing non-natural unified mind. I have here what are some popular answers to that: Platonism, panpsychism, and how divine conceptualism is better than that. I have here some top answers to questions that people may ask. Necessary truths don't need grounding. Moderate realism, structuralism, logic is conventional. We can just be deflationist. Bankeroff only applies to Platonism. Here's this little more advanced arguments there. And I end with naturalism is defeated by the mind of God because all of these things fail to get around what I just brought up there. And so I hope that helps you as you're understanding the bigger problems that you enter into and why the self is so important, because the self is interacting with that. Okay. All right. It is not that there is no self. It's quite the opposite, actually. Says there is no self. Doesn't say there is no self. It says you mistake yourself for the mind and body. Mind and body are just appearances. Okay, that's good. I would agree that yourself is more than just the mind and body. But the definition that I got from chat is that it said it's not a self. Now, once again, I don't rely on chat to teach me everything. I just wanted to see there why it would tell me that. Let me go back here to where I had it. Then I have it over here. Oops. Yeah, here we go. So it says the world, the body, the individual self are illusions. Okay, well, that's what it's saying. The real individual, there is no real individual self. So send me something that says the opposite of that, right? Like give me a link to prove that wrong, because I can only go on what I see up here, you know. So I appreciate your time here. You said a lot while I was talking there. Buddhism argues for, okay, so you're talking about this type of Buddhism. Okay. This says that Advaita says the Buddhists call no self is a recognition that everything you point to is an object to the subject. It takes a subject to deny self. Okay, that's what we would say. Yep. Identifying the self is a lot like pointing out the screen behind a projected movie. Just because things appear on a screen doesn't affect the screen, and all of it makes the screen hard to recognize. Let me see. Identifying the self is a lot like pointing out the screen behind a projected movie. Just because things appear on the screen doesn't affect the screen, and all of it makes the screen hard to recognize. I'm not following that. You'd have to simplify this point here for me. All hail the poached egg. Radical skepticism is a cool thought experiment in philosophy, but I don't see any value in it exactly. Thank you for your time here, those who are commenting. Every day with water boiling at the same temperature, it's just another day of evidence for it. We have no way to test if we can change the laws yet. Be cool if one day we do. Yeah, but what you're missing right there, I'm not sure if you're missing it, but I'm just going to think you are. I'm not sure. Sometimes I read these comments and it's hard to understand. Is that we have no way to test if we can change the laws. That's not the question. Is can you change the laws? The question is, how do you know the regularity of those laws? Just stacking up 1,000 days of doing it doesn't mean tomorrow's regularity is there. Like, think of regularity as the thing we're trying to defend. We're trying to defend this thing called regularity. And regularity is not a science thing. It's a thing we're experiencing. But we don't know how to ground regularity other than just saying it's regular. I hope that helps. If panpsychism means I can't be an agnostic atheist anymore, then I'm what would you call a panpsychist religion? I would say you're a deist. I would say panpsychism is a form of deism, because you have to bite the bullet at some point and say that you are ascribing something that's equivalent to a god. And that, to me, in discussion, is the most honest position, is an agnostic deist of some kind. And I think that a lot of you should do that. And I think you should own it and be kind in conversation with theists, recognizing that we both have mysteries, and then investigate the God of the Bible with all that you take for granted or use from a deistic mindset, and stop doing sky daddy stuff. And not saying that you personally have, but stray away from all of that rage bait that now makes me come up with rage bait against them on my channels, and just go, hey, I get it. We're full of information. We're full of base reality consciousness, and it's hard to ground it without inserting a God. And so I'm going to put a stop there, and I'm going to say it's God, but I'm not going to attribute any attributes to that God. I'm not going to accept any of the holy books of that God. I'm not going to pretend I know that God in one sense, but I'm going to be honest and say I need a foundation, a principle that at least logically enables me to do everything else I'm going to do. I'm going to now do panpsychic research. I'm now going to discover what is the underlying reality of the world. I'm going to make philosophical claims. I'm going to believe that I have a self in some way, right? And you're just going to go off and do life. And that's why when you think about the founding of the United States and how many deists were there, that was right around the time of all of this becoming so popularized. Like Hume was, and Locke, and these guys were contemporaries of the deist founders. And we oftentimes, when we look at history, we can sometimes see how, like United States history, we can see how that shaped. So I'll give you an example here. How many of the founders were deist and contemporaries with Locke and Hume? Okay. Yeah, my American founders right here. Here we go. most scholars agree about 4 to 6 prominent figures: Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Paine. Yep. So Locke was during this. American founders most active during this time. So they were not necessarily with Locke unless they were super old. But some of them definitely with Hume, right? Were contemporaries with Hume, who built a lot on Locke. And so that's where I think the most honest position is personally. And I think that would be a lot better for all of us doing things. Okay, I'm just going through this. Sorry, I'm a little bit behind. So to respond to regularity and how we know it's true, all I can say is we currently gather evidence best we can. But you're in the circle now. You're still in Hume's problem. See, how do you know you're not in the matrix gathering that circle? You have to insert a principle, all things being as they are. And that's why that used to be a part of the scientific endeavor. And it's actually in Latin here. All things being equal in Latin, and where does it come from? Because you have to, like how Joe Rogan said, you have to, as he started moving away from atheism, he basically saw that the atheists, the people he were acknowledging, were like, basically grant me one miracle and we'll explain the rest type stuff, And so that's what you're basically saying. You're saying, I'm going to do this evidence and I'm going to do all this study, but you could just grant me this foundation. Just grant me everything that I'm supposed to be proving. Just grant me that. And then now I'll show you that I can prove stuff. And so, ceteris paribus, all things being equal. And this is where it came out of. And the phrase was widely used like by Francis Bacon, who was a Christian, Rene Descartes. Think therefore I am Bacon. Francis Bacon developed the scientific method. So just know that that's what you're doing. I'm glad you're doing it. Like when you and I, let's say you and I were in the same scientific field or same engineering field, and we show up to do stuff, we're both saying that before we get into the laboratory or start flying our airplane, right? Which is like one of the next hobbies I want to take up. This is how we're approaching flight class. You're right next to me in flight class. You're going to learn with me. All things being equal, this is now how we're going to learn to fly, boys. This is aerodynamics. This is what we're going to do. You remove that, we're not learning anything. And we're only going to sit there staring at blankness until we can get a foundation to do that. There's nothing we can do forward from that. Now you can say, well, I learned how to fly and I never knew that Latin phrase one time, because you already assumed it. And that's what Hume is saying. You're already assuming it. And Russell is saying you just have to insert it. Hume never found it. I'll just now insert it. So just go on with your life and stop pretending that it matters. And I'm trying to tell you, it does matter. It matters to everything we do. It literally is the framework for every single thing we do. All right. So me personally, I don't really make fun of Christians. That's cool. Thank you. Unless they make fun of my views or use their religions to do things I view as wrong, like buy in a certain orange man's pandering. Well, that's another discussion. But remember, you have no moral objective values. You have no grounding for any truth. So all that you're doing, this tit for tat, is out of the assumption that you have a value that's better than their value, and you can go forward with that. Hume's problem is radical skepticism, which is nice and all, but until we can check it, I don't care to think about it. All I will say, I don't think religion are exactly airtight, similar issues. Well, that's the point. So you see, notice I hadn't even got to your comment here, and I already answered it. You're just taking it for granted. You're just going, it's a radical skepticism. I don't buy into it, but I'm just going to go on. You're ignoring it. You haven't changed it. You haven't solved it. And you're doing exactly what I said you had to do. You had to insert this. Otherwise, let me just show it to you right here. This is another way of doing it, because I was pointing this out before to somebody, and I'll just make this cool picture again. Okay, so let's say you and I are right here. Okay, so you and I, that's a poorly drawn person. But let's say you and I are right here, and we want to do science in this laboratory. Here's my best at drawing a beaker, and we want to open our eyes, and we want to look at this beaker right here, okay? Now, the first thing that we need is we need a foundation that we just went through, all things being equal. We need this right here, right? But you're saying, no, I don't need that, okay? So I'm going to now ask you, how do you know this beaker is in front of you and you're not a poached egg? How do you know you're not in the matrix? Okay. So I'm just going to do radical skepticism on you. And then now what are you going to probably do is you're going to go back here and you're going to go back into this place called the past that doesn't exist anymore. This doesn't exist. 2 seconds ago doesn't exist. Go back there and get me back my money I lost trading the other day, right? Can't do it. What you're going to do there is now you're going to have a memory, okay? You're going to have a memory. This is a thought. And you're going to tell me, Joe, this little weird egg-shaped head, you're going to say, Joe, I know I'm here because of what I experienced right here in this thought. Now, of course, I could say you were created today with the thoughts pre-programmed, just like when I'm learning Gears of War. I'm starting a new game with Gears of War. I don't start with him as a baby. I start with him as an adult. He already knows how to walk. He knows how to talk. Just pushing that aside for right now, I'm just going to show you the simple infinite regress. You're going to say, Joe, I'm right here today, but I know yesterday there was that same beaker. That beaker was there, and the computer was there, and the analysis was there. But I'm now going to say to you, how do you know scientifically you were here? What scientific method can you now go into here with, like this beaker that you're about ready to look at? What beaker can you use to go here and verify this with experimentation, hypothesis, etc.? You can't, right? Now, the next question I'm then going to ask you is, let's just say we forget all about that and you have no foundation and you did everything. I'm now going to say to you, before you write your paper and you publish your work and you put it in a blog and you say, here I am, I got an A+, I'm the man, I'm getting a Nobel Peace Prize. I'm now going to draw a line right at this present moment, and I'm now going to say, how do you know tomorrow when you arrive there that everything you wrote here is there? What methodology that you did with this beaker, that same methodology you used with the beaker, will you now put into the future to show me this paper is going to work? Because I'm not there yet, okay? That radical skepticism is of every second. It's not just tomorrow, it's not just yesterday, it's of every second. And so it's impossible to do this without this foundation. So here you are, and let's just put the steps right here. Here you're stepping on it right now, that foundation. The next moment, you're taking that step, you're stepping on it. The next moment, you're stepping on it. There is no difference between you and a poached egg or sanity and insanity unless you walk on this principle every moment of your life. That's the only way you do it. And what we call that principle is, we call this principle God, through his son, Jesus Christ, who is the logos of his mind and has grounded all of those things. And this is where I get preachy. And we teach you, as John is ministering to the Greeks and using words and phrases that they are familiar with, he teaches them the understanding of how to put it together with their philosophy of mind and of being with the Jewish understanding. He kind of brings what we would call Jerusalem and Athens together. And he says, in the beginning was the word, that is logic, logos. Biology, ology is that word logos, okay? Theos, leogi, you're learning the theology of God, right? In the beginning was the word was with God, and the word was God. He was with God in the beginning, and through him all things were made. Without him, nothing was made that has been made. So now you can ground everything that has been made in a logical way, teleological way, to understand it. You can say you can try that with other gods. Go ahead and try. Now we'll go book in the man, right? But it's impossible to get around this principle. It's impossible. So hopefully that helped. Going back to the little picture I drew, just look at that if you get confused, right? Correct. I don't believe in objective morals. I don't need any objective morals to enforce my subjective ones. I'm selfish like that. Yeah. Well, you're just living in an illusion, because you do have objective morals. At some point, you're going to say something's not just wrong for others. For yourself, you're going to say something is wrong for others. When you do that from the subjective standpoint, you're going to ask them to agree with you. The moment you ask them to agree with you, you're not asking them to agree with something that is subjective. You're asking them to agree to something that's objective. Otherwise, then their subjectivity could defeat your subjectivity. So the moment you say, don't murder me, you're asking them not to take that subjectively. Because if they stop feeling like not murdering you and start feeling like murdering you, you would have no appeal to stop them. Because remember, you have just conceded that they're subjective like you, but you don't live like that. You don't live subjectively. You actually live objectively. You have a lot of subjective things and experiences, don't get me wrong. But the moment your preservation, your life, your family, your children, things that are valuable to you, you'll ascend, just like C.S. Lewis said, on the bus, when somebody steps on your toes, you'll ascend to objectivity just like that. And it will become natural to you. So that's how that works. Science doesn't deal 100% absolutes, neither does philosophy. So philosophy can at base levels. It can be contingent, but it has to necessarily work at certain base levels. And I would call that like the foundational levels. And of course, science doesn't deal in 100% absolutes, and you're exactly right. It's the best guess. And it's the best guess of people. But they have to ground it by the philosophies of things like the excluded middle, which has to be absolute. If the excluded middle, law of non-contradiction, and identity are not absolute and necessary, then you would never come up with any best guess. God bless everyone. What's up, Yesenia? Infinite regress needing a solution isn't a consensus in philosophy. I know it's not, but there's no way around it. Brute facts are their way around it, and I don't agree with brute facts without inserting a personal mind of God, because what is a brute fact? What is it? And then we go back to that argument I gave against naturalism. A brute fact has to be grounded in something. What is it grounded in? It just is what it is. It is what it is. You've called it a brute fact, and you've defined a brute fact, but what is the grounding for needing brute facts or having them? See, God gives brute facts because God is a necessary being. A necessary being has a necessary mind, and a necessary mind gives brute facts. And the founder of the solution, Socrates, with his unmoved mover, was a deist version. Exactly. Even if you need an unmoved mover, why God? Because God is the only, like, it's so funny. I'm literally answering questions before I get to it, because God's mind is the only thing that can ground everything we do with our mind. Other words, you just have like a brick wall that you're just like stopping at, saying, this is my unmoved mover. Well, where's the causality in that? Remember, you don't need another definition. You don't need another mover to ground your unmoved mover. I'm not saying that. I know this is a stopping point. I'm just saying now within your unmoved mover, you have to give explanatory scope. Your unmoved mover has to explain things that give answers to a parsimonious or a unified sense of the world. And just simply saying it's an unmoved mover, a mindless unmoved mover. You have no harmony between minds and that unmoved mover. I have a mind. You have a mind. You and I are sharing thoughts. How are we doing that with an unmoved mover that grounds all knowledge, but yet it doesn't have a mind? If the unmoved mover doesn't have a mind, how in the world did I get a mind in the world of a mindless unmoved mover? See what I'm saying? It only makes sense to have the unmoved mover have a mind. And as our minds interact, we're interacting on his mind frame. The mind frame of God is the self code. The code of the self is in the mind frame of God. That's why it can live without a body. It can go wherever it needs to be. It's information stored in the mind of God, and it's interacting in this world. There we go. And I appreciate your time. I think it was just for you, my friend. Or rather, your God, an unmoved mover, would be a God by most. Yeah, and I just answered that by most definitions of a God. Exactly. And I don't mind that. That's actually being honest. But my God would have to be the God, because he's the only one that gives the explanation of Jesus raising from the dead. And that's where we just go into the evidence of Jesus raising from the dead, which I don't have time to do. I like to stay on about 2 hours. So next time, you seem very nice, man, as a deist, or at least someone that's open to being a deist. I have no problem going through the evidence. I'm sure you've seen it 100 times. I'll just show you right here how to research it yourself from a trusted source who also does open mics with a much bigger audience. Inspiring philosophy. You can go here to his channel and then just look up resurrection. And I think he has some of the best videos on it, and it would be enjoyable. And then you can go to him on that. There is no evidence for that. I will probably be back to listen to you. Please don't bring up the shade. Please don't bring up the shade. What is the shade? Oh, the shroud. No, I don't believe in the shroud, but I think it's interesting. Yep. So the moment I get someone like yourself to this point, and then they say I'm not convinced, actually, at this point, it's not my job to convince you, because it would be like me convincing you to marry somebody or to fall in love or to love your child or something. I believe in subjectivity. I do. I just believe it has to be grounded. The only thing that I can say to you is that I experienced God before I knew any of the arguments. I had an encounter with God that drastically changed my life. And from that point, I've had many, many ways to get off this road. I've had many opportunities to become a wide variety of a believer in various things. And it's gone the exact opposite direction. I've fallen more in love with God. I was weeping the other day in my car as I was driving home from snowboarding. I have a 2-month-old right now. Excuse me. So I have 7 children. My youngest is 2 months old. Excuse me. And these inexpressible things, and I'll just show this to you right here, because this might encourage you here. These inexpressible things are only in my mind, because I've debated Muslims. I've wrote books on Muslims. Okay. You see, I have the Bhagavad Gita back here. I have the Quran. Okay. And I'm not saying it has to be one of the big ones, but I've studied these smaller ones and all of this. The beauty of Christianity and how it corresponds to the truth of God is the greatest case of Christianity for me, the evidence of anything I know. Now, that's all subjective. So it's me. It's me showing you this is the greatest evidence Joe has. I do believe the resurrection is objective. I just don't believe anybody's really going to go into the argument online in a moment and be convinced of it if they've already heard those arguments. I believe that you'll first have to come to a place where your heart is open to what that was about. So in other words, when I debated many years ago, I don't have a big platform. I never did, but I've been through all the trends. So there was a place called Stickam that we used to go to and debate with the rational responders, Brian Sapien, and the blasphemy challenge and so forth. And I remember him talking one time because people were asking him, what would be the biggest proof for you, or what's been the biggest proof or the evidence of God or something like that. And he talked about a janitor that he had met that was a Christian who had such a peace and a way about him. He said that's spoken to me more about God than anything else. And you also think about a Joe Rogan and some of the others. There's a lot like this right now. Russell Brand would be another. Ion Hersey, that's another. Okay, so there's a great coming to Christ through these experiences that you can't explain for others. And one of the things I love about Gavin Ortlund right here is where he says, you would want this to be true. And I'll play a song that I wrote through AI. It doesn't sound like AI unless you're really like good at spotting it, but I'll show you this one right here. And he says it better than I can. And I use this as well because it comes like from a C.S. Lewis understanding. It wasn't 4 months ago. Let me see. You should want Christianity to be true. Right here.
To be bound together in marriage.
To me, the story of Christianity with your life experience, there's nothing else like it. Let me just give you a little
thrilling possibility you can consider. If it's true, it's not just good news, it's the best. The claim that Jesus rose from the dead is the most thrilling possibility you can consider. If it's true, it's not just good news, it's the best news. It's not just hope, it's the best imaginable hope. This is the happiest possible religion. You could not make up something more enchanting and wonderful. Pull out a sheet of paper and try and just dream to your heart's content. You'll never find something as happy and good as the bodily resurrection of Jesus on Easter morning. If it indeed happened, you should want this to be true. And it's not just a better alternative to disbelief in the afterlife, it's a better alternative to different views of the afterlife. Bodily resurrection is a unique idea that entails a particular kind of happiness. My goal in this video is to try to press that happiness into your heart as much as I can, that it would touch you in your heart no matter what.
Yeah, so I can't go through the whole thing, but yeah, I appreciate your testimony. Yeah, same thing with me. I backslid in high school, became wild, almost died either from people killing me or me overdosing on drugs. And then I came to Christ, and there's nothing that's comparable to it. Some of the people say it like this. I remember Premier Christianity was interviewing some of the atheists that were around during the Four Horsemen, like the Dawkins, Timon Harris, and they were talking about what brought them out. And one was talking about this love of myth, very much similar to like C.S. Lewis, and how she was so jealous of the characters of the Lord of the Rings and how they had this sense of purpose, how there was a camaraderie, and how there was a fight against good versus evil. And she said that actually opened her up to start reading the Bible, to understand, why do we crave for this? Why do we have such a value for good overcoming evil and all of this, right? Well, my way is very similar to what Gavin is saying here, that when I try to put together, like we say, parsimonious, when I try to put together my love for my family, my love of courage, my love of winning and evil over good overcoming evil, when I look at my love for justice and things being set right in place, when I look at my own self and how I communicate with myself and go through changes of life with myself, and how I've come to like myself more being off of drugs and alcohol, right? Like, so you like look at all of these experiences. I'm with people, I'm falling in love, I'm getting to know myself, I'm studying, there's this part about me and my gifts. And then you put it together. The Christian story to me is the only one, because what is taking you away from that? Well, that's sin, right? And then what is redeeming you from that? Not your good works. It's the work of Christ, because you need forgiveness first before you do the good works. And then once you have the forgiveness, now you can do the good works and apply them in your life. And if you fail, you can get back up, right? And you can receive forgiveness. And so there's this sense of like hope. There's a sense of courage. And when you study Jesus and what he's doing, there's no religious figure like him. You know, Buddha called his children the great ball and chain of his life. He had an experience that nobody else saw. He expected people to believe him. There's contradictory worldviews in his stories, okay? And yet you look at Christ, you know, he's raising from the dead. There's at least people who claim to have seen him. They're writing about him. Then there's enemies like Paul having experiences. So this seems like a totally different kind of thing than like a Buddhist under the tree. And by the way, I've been to Nepal, where Buddhism started, and to India 3 times, where it's, you know, heavily influenced there. And you begin to see like Christianity is hitting things that this doesn't. And then you look at other monotheistic religions like Islam, and they're trying to have a prophet, or Mormonism and all of this. And yet they take it too far. They get into the ridiculous. They get into the unproven. They get into these contradictions, you know, God having a God, that's Mormonism, or Islam just trying to hold on to all these prophets to get some type of a validation, and then they contradict these prophets. And yet Christianity fits the glove of Judaism, brings about the prophecies that came beforehand. No matter where you date those books, they're coming before Dead Sea Scrolls, before Jesus, and yet he's living it out. The disciples, depending on how many you want to take as their martyrdom, you know, like Apologia tries to say there's not many that were martyrs. I don't care, but just take this with me here. There's people that are dying for this belief. They actually believe. They don't think it's a lie. And yet then it starts to grow underground in the culture of the Romans, where they have all of these gods. So it's like if Jesus was just a god among other gods, and I was debating with a Satanist yesterday on TikTok about all the similarities between Dionysus and whatever. If that was what it was, then why didn't it just stay there? Why don't the disciples quote the other gods like the church apologists do and say, well, our God is somewhat like your God, like how Justin Martyr does? Why are they quoting from the Old Testament quite uniquely and then proposing things that nobody has really heard before, like these takes on these prophecies? They were there. The virgin will be with child and he'll be called Emmanuel, etc. They're there, but no one was really expecting it like that, right? And then there are a God among many gods of Rome, and yet somehow they start winning the Romans. We don't have to even put great miracles behind this, though I do in the book of Acts. But let's just say it's a word of mouth thing, like Bart Ehrman says. Why does it convert so many Romans? Not just the original disciples, but so many Romans are turning to it against political power, against family allegiance. Why? Because you look at their lifestyle. They were adopting the unwanted children. They were breaking down the social barriers. They were treating their slaves different. That's where you go back to the book Dominion. And it was a system that was totally unknown to the world at that time. And then you could talk about political powers getting involved later. But Rome was brought to Christ on its knees, not by force, but by conversion. And then there was force later on, don't get me wrong. But that story captures my heart. Those people, that person, Jesus, the way those people understood him. And then when I pray, I don't see every answer to prayer, but I see answers to prayer. Sometimes people mock us and they say, well, Joe, he answers your prayer there in the suburbs of Chicago in your plush house. Why doesn't he answer the 20 million starving today? He does. What do you think our missionaries are doing? We're going out there. Christians are the largest missionary movement in the world and have always been. There's no other movement on the planet that has cared for more people to be answers to prayers than Christians. It's a fact. There's communism, socialism, Islam, Buddhism. No one has cared for the planet like us. Now, you might say, well, there's been some atrocities. Okay. But you look at what we've done when we did it according to our scriptures. Like, we didn't go to war because of Jesus. We went to war because of political reasons. When Muslims go to war, they go to war because of Islam. It's in the book, Surah chapter 9. I have all the references. When we acted unlike Christ in crusades, or, sometimes we had to defend ourselves. But, you get the point of our conquistadoring and colonizing, and the edicts that the churches are making to own slaves and all that. That's nowhere in the Bible, where you can find this actually in the Quran, right? So look at our charity, look at the world and how it changed through Christianity. Look at how massive it grew based on those principles, not just conquistadoring, but on those principles. Because even today, we're not a Christian nation, and yet there's a revival of Christianity. Why is there, like right now, numbers changing in these European nations that once were Christian backslid, came away, and now are coming back? France is seeing a huge revitalization of Christianity all throughout Europe because they're realizing, man, this was bankrupt. What new atheism promised us 20 years ago has led to the highest rise of suicide. We are now at the highest rates of mental depression and anxiety and trauma. We are at the highest levels of drug addiction and sexual transmitted diseases. And you think that is a problem of Christianity? That's the problem of walking away from Christianity. When we were Christian, we were less of all of those things. And when they were wrong Christians, we protested them and we fought wars against them. All right. Glad that you enjoyed it. Sending it. I got to get going. Went over 2 hours. Guys, share if you care. Put some comments underneath here. Look for when I'm live next. Hopefully you'll subscribe and we'll get some customers up next time. God bless. Have a great day.